The train station buzzed with life, a cacophony of voices blending with the rhythmic clatter of trains arriving and departing. Farewells and reunions swirled around, filled with hope and sorrow. Amidst the crowd, a mother clutched a small, weathered box to her chest, her hands trembling. "Don't do anything brave," she urged, her voice tight as she gazed up at her son. Though he stood tall in her eyes, he was still the child she had raised, full of dreams. The son forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The sharp whistle of the train cut through the noise, a reminder of the time slipping away. He leaned down and embraced her, as though trying to still the storm of dread swirling inside him. "Take this." She pressed the box into his hands. "Don't ever open it. But if you're captured, give it to them as a gift." The boy took the box from his mother. "Do you promise me?" "I promise," he said, feeling the weight of her words. He glanced at his little sister, her wide eyes filled with innocence as she sat in her wheelchair. Leaning down, he kissed her gently on the forehead. "Be brave," she whispered, the sincerity of her words piercing through the noise around them. The train's whistle shrieked again, and the boy stepped back, his heart aching as he waved one last goodbye. The train lurched into motion, pulling him away from everything familiar into the unknown. The battlefield air was thick with the smell of smoke and gunpowder. The boy, having quickly become a young man from the demands of war, gripped his rifle tighter. Try as he might, the sound of explosions and gunfire drowned out all thoughts of home as battle raged all around him. "Get down!" a voice shouted, and he dove into a trench, just as an explosion rocked the earth nearby. The young man fought fiercely, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Each encounter was a blur of movement and instinct. Every moment, a razor-thin line between life and death. In the thick of the fighting, the din of war faded, leaving only the pounding of his own heart echoing in his ears. He saw his comrades fall, one by one, their lives extinguished in an instant. It was a relentless tide of violence, and he was swept along with it. But then, in a moment, everything changed. A large blast threw him off his feet. Dazed and disoriented, he looked up to see enemy soldiers approaching, their faces shrouded in grim determination. Before he could react, they seized him, dragging him and the few other soldiers that were still alive away from the battlefield they had fought so fiercely to defend. The soldiers dragged him through the mud, and the young man glanced up. Through blurred eyes, he could just barely see where they were taking him. Towards a large trench where others of his fellow soldiers were already lined up. He watched as they were shot without warning and tumbled back into the mass grave. Suddenly, his mother's parting words filled his ears.
"Give it to them as a gift."
"Wait!" the young man hoarsely shouted. "Please, wait! I have something to offer you." The soldiers dragging him abruptly stopped and looked at each other with skepticism. "What do you mean?" one demanded. "You have information?" "I have this," he said, pulling the small box from his pocket, the one his mother had given him. The one he had managed to keep safe with him this whole time, across countless battles and hundreds, perhaps thousands of miles of war. The soldiers looked at each other again, and their skepticism turned into mockery. The two men both began to laugh as one of them snatched the box from the young man's hands. Without pausing, he opened the box, tossing the wooden lid to the ground. "What's this? A treasure?" he mockingly asked. The object in the box glinted in the light. It wasn't a treasure at all, just a simple silver spoon. His laughter stopped. "Very well. In repayment, you won't die. Not here, at least." The young man didn't have any time to question what this meant, though, since a club immediately struck the back of his head, sending him into a deep, dark black. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself in a damp, dark cell, raucous laughter echoing off the walls. The same soldiers who had taken him on the battlefield were now sitting with several others, talking to each other in their native tongue. The one who had dragged the young man began to act out a pantomime of the young man offering him the box, much to the amusement of his fellow soldiers. The young man watched through the bars of his cell as the soldier now reached into the box and grabbed the spoon, holding it up like a war trophy as the group laughed harder and harder, none more than the one holding the spoon. His laughter, though, abruptly stopped and a sharp crack echoed through the room, louder than any bullet. The soldier's body twisted grotesquely, his spine bending backward with an unnatural snap. His eyes bulged wide, panic overtaking his once smug face, before he crumpled to the ground. The rest of the soldiers gasped and stepped back, horrified at what they had just seen. But try as they might, none of them could look away. Their compulsive curiosity forced them all to keep looking at the twisted body of their friend, or, more specifically, at the spoon he still clutched in his hand. Slowly, carefully, one of the soldiers stepped forward, kneeled down, and reached for the spoon. He had to work to pry it from the paralyzed hand of his comrade, and the moment he gripped the handle, another crack rang out, even louder this time, as he too saw his spine fold backwards at a perfect 90-degree angle. The soldier fell to the floor, the spoon dropping to the ground near him. But the other soldiers didn't run. Just like their friend, one by one, they each watched in turn as another picked up the spoon, and immediately upon having a firm grip, saw their body contort backwards at a right angle. The young man couldn't believe what was happening. Soldier after soldier watched, waiting for their turn to be bent backwards, until finally, only one was left. He struggled, trying to resist the strange compulsion to pick up the cursed spoon, but he couldn't. He too joined his comrades, his spine snapping as his body collapsed to the floor. As the last soldier fell, so too did the spoon, landing not far from the young man's cell. He could suddenly feel it calling to him. He didn't just want to hold the spoon, he needed it. If he just reached out through the bars of his cell, he could almost touch it. Shouts in a language he barely understood echoed in from the corridor. Moments later, the door to the damp room swung open with a loud bang. A group of soldiers, with different uniforms from those who had captured him, stormed in. One of the soldiers surveilled the scene, the soldiers that lay twisted and broken on the ground. "What in the hell happened here?" he exclaimed, his gaze landing on the silver spoon. As the soldier curiously reached for the spoon, the sergeant inadvertently kicked it away and pointed at the young man's cell. "Get him out!" he barked. His command snapped the soldiers into action. "Please, the spoon!" the young man cried, his voice desperate and frantic. But the soldiers didn't understand the language he was speaking. They were too busy fishing through the pockets of the fallen soldiers, trying to find keys to his cell. "Calm down, we're trying to help you, son," the sergeant replied, his tone edged with annoyance. Finally, one soldier finds the keys. The door to his cell swings open, and the young man dives to the ground. The Allied soldiers exchanged awkward glances. They initially believed the young man was dropping to his knees in gratitude for being saved. Instead, he was scrambling across the dirt floor, desperately searching for something. "I think he's looking for this," one of the soldiers said, holding up the spoon by the tip of its handle. The young man's eyes widened. "That's mine!" he shouted, lunging toward it. Several Allied soldiers grabbed the young man, unsure of his intentions, but as he moved, the soldier with the spoon instinctively tightened his grip on it. A loud crack pierced the air. Everyone turned just in time to see the Allied soldier bend backward at a perfect 90-degree angle, his face contorting in pain and shock as he collapsed to the ground. A wave of compulsive curiosity began to spread among the soldiers as they stared at the scene. One by one, they all started to move closer to the spoon. Their sergeant, a seasoned SCP agent who had decided to join the fight against tyranny and whose long service with the Foundation had given him experience with strange anomalies, barked out a sharp command. "Leave it!" he shouted, catching one of his men just as he touched the handle with the tips of his fingers. "Everybody step back!" The urgency in his voice snapped the soldiers out of their daze. They instinctively moved aside, creating space between themselves and the spoon's sinister aura. Slowly, carefully, the sergeant knelt down and scooped the spoon into the wooden box, his movements deliberate and steady. As the young man watched the sergeant slide the box's lid closed, he couldn't help but chuckle bitterly to himself. The very object that was meant to protect him had almost become the harbinger of his death. This seemingly harmless object, now classified as SCP-463, is deceptively simple: a spoon that bends its victims. When gripped by human hands, it forces their spine to snap backward at a 90-degree angle just below the T6 thoracic vertebra, resulting in near instantaneous death or severe paralysis. Its effects are immediate and unavoidable. No gloves, barriers, or protective gear can prevent the violent contortions. Despite its mundane appearance, SCP-463 has claimed multiple lives during testing. Strangely, it only affects humans, showing no unusual properties when handled by non-human subjects. Even indirect contact, such as through gloves, does nothing to reduce its deadly impact, suggesting the spoon possesses some sort of psychic or anomalous trigger. Researchers at the SCP Foundation have conducted extensive analysis using neutron imaging, MRI scans, and other methods, but the true nature of SCP-463's lethal effect remains unknown. All they can observe are the horrifying results: a sudden, violent muscle contraction that bends the human body unnaturally. Currently, SCP-463 is housed in a secure containment site, kept in a small, reinforced glass display case. Transport and handling are strictly regulated, and personnel are prohibited from directly interacting with the spoon under any circumstances. After an incident during testing, food and utensils are no longer allowed near SCP-463's containment area, though the exact details of that incident remain classified. Let this story serve as a reminder: even the simplest, most ordinary objects can mask unimaginable danger. After all, who would have thought something as simple as a spoon could become such a deadly anomaly?
A kindly-looking old woman is carrying groceries into her home. When she closes the door, a crack forms in the wall, and a tile slides down off her roof, crashing to the ground and shattering. The next day, the local builder seems confused. He just fixed a similar problem a week ago at another house, and another the week before that. He'll patch this crack just like he did before and repair the roof, but as he does so, he can't help but think he'll be at another house with the same problem soon. Old people are like this sometimes, though, breaking things on purpose to get someone to come visit them. Oh well, as long as the money is right, he'll keep doing the repairs. That evening, the old woman is in bed when she's woken up by something falling onto her face. A crack is opened in the ceiling right above her bed, and plaster is falling on her. What is happening to this house? She would have to call the builder again in the morning and let him know that it was getting worse. She gets up to clean the plaster dust off her face, but stops halfway to the door. Was that a noise she heard? It sounded like it was coming from downstairs. Another noise. She definitely heard something. Is someone in her home? "Hello?" she cries out. "Whoever you are, you better go. My husband is going to be home any moment, and he won't be happy." The noises seem to have stopped. Maybe she was imagining things. Who would rob a poor old woman, after all? She didn't have anything worth taking. She still needs to wash the plaster off her face, though. She listens for a moment, and when she doesn't hear anything else, she opens the bedroom door and screams. The next day, a child stands in front of the house with a look of shock. Was there an earthquake? How could a house end up like this? They ring the doorbell, but there's no answer. They knock on the door and are surprised to find that the door is open. "Grandma?" the child cries into the quiet house. No response. The child enters and looks around. The house is a mess. Chunks of plaster have fallen off the walls and ceiling. Shelves have fallen over, spilling their contents. And there's broken glass from shattered light bulbs everywhere. The boy looks up the stairs and can see that his grandmother's bedroom door is open and the light is on. "Grandma, are you up there?" Still no response. The child nervously starts up the stairs, gripping the railing tight. They quietly make their way to the bedroom and step into the sliver of light coming from the cracked door. The child pushes the door open to find their grandmother on the floor. Only, it isn't their grandmother. Whatever this is looks like their grandmother, but like she has been stretched and twisted, her body bent at angles where no joints exist. The child is paralyzed with fear, unable to do anything but stare. But the nightmare isn't over yet, because their grandmother is still alive. Sadly, reports like these are all too common in this small town that is plagued by attacks from SCP-463, also known as the Crooked Man. SCP-463 is an extremely dangerous anomalous creature that is currently plaguing the population of Tembe, a small rural village in Oxfordshire, England. Every 12 years during the fall and winter months, SCP-463 will engage in a period of hostile behavior that lasts for roughly 70 days, during which time it will target and attack people who are indoors and alone after sunset. Those targeted by SCP-783 will find that the building they are in rapidly deteriorates, causing damage and creating structural integrity issues. These often appear as cracks on the outside of the building that lead to the buildings taking on a crooked appearance. Unfortunately, while the SCP Foundation is aware of both the location and the periods within which SCP-783 operates, it has so far been unable to prevent any attacks. Additionally, the Foundation has yet to be able to produce either an image or even a physical description of SCP-783 due to the effect it has on recording equipment. Cameras set up to capture the anomaly produce only distorted or corrupted footage, leaving its appearance a mystery. Victims targeted by SCP-783 meet a fate that is, in many ways, worse than death. Their bodies will experience extreme deformations, as their bones suffer dozens of fractures and are stretched and twisted in various unnatural directions. They are then healed by the rapid generation of cartilage and the growth of extra skin to cover the new elongated limbs, leaving the victims a malformed knot of gnarled extremities. Some of the cases are quite severe, with one victim having just their forearm extended to over 2.4 meters and another who was left stretched to 12.5 meters in height. Despite the gruesome injuries suffered, the majority of victims are still alive following the attacks, though they will more often than not be left completely paralyzed, in a persistent vegetative state, or both. 27 victims of SCP-783 are currently being held in a long-term care facility within a wing of a local hospital that was requisitioned by the Foundation specifically for the care and treatment of 783 victims. Like many of the anomalies that the SCP Foundation investigates and contains, many of the residents of Tembe appear to have some awareness of the Crooked Man, and the anomaly has become something of a local boogeyman. Researchers have even documented local school children singing a nursery rhyme that appears connected and may even explain the origins of the creature. It goes, "There lived a crooked man who made a crooked deal. He kept a crooked cane and his catch in crooked creel. He stole a crooked child who cried a crooked squeal, and that crooked little man was broken on the wheel." A month before a recent SCP-783 period of activity was to begin, a Class D personnel, D-209, was sent to live in a Foundation-owned home in the village. Audio and video recording equipment was set up throughout the house in case the D-Class was targeted, in the hopes that some information could be gleaned should something take place. 43 days after he began living in the house, something finally did. One evening while in bed reading a book, D-209 heard noises on the ground floor of the home. Cameras on the first floor experienced corruption and showed only a distortion moving through the house. When D-209 attempted to leave the bedroom and escape the home, they immediately encountered SCP-783. During a period of time that lasted roughly 5 hours, their bones were broken numerous times and reset over and over, leaving D-209 a twisted mass of flesh and bone. Strangely, at the exact same time that D-209 was being attacked, all 27 of the living prior SCP-783 victims in the hospital experienced violent seizures, despite most of them having been declared functionally brain dead and the rest being totally paralyzed. Also concurrent with the attack was a seismic event on the outskirts of town, and the details revealed by this event were both illuminating and extremely disturbing. Foundation personnel were dispatched to the site of the seismic activity to investigate and determine if it was connected to SCP-783 in any way. There, they found a small group of angry townspeople, perhaps frustrated by seemingly unending paranormal events in their town and the lack of progress that had been made to stop them. After a tense standoff, SCP Agent Collins fired her service weapon into the air, and the crowd quickly scattered. Now, free of distraction, the agents could begin their investigation in earnest. They immediately spotted several objects sticking out of the earth. Upon closer inspection, these were identified as elongated human toes. A dig team was sent to the site, and by the next day, a mass grave had been uncovered that was filled with the twisted mass of what appeared to be victims of SCP-783. Their mutated and drawn-out bodies were well preserved despite being buried directly in the ground, and had all been buried head down, with their arms extending deeper into the burial pit. As one researcher was attempting to take a tissue sample from one of the bodies, the ground beneath him gave way and he fell into the pit. He landed on the tangled mass of limbs which shifted under his weight, and he disappeared into the pit beneath them. Agent Collins immediately found a length of rope, tied it to her waist, and climbed into the pit with instructions to the on-site team to pull her back up when she signaled. Agent Collins descended into the pit beneath the bodies, and after several minutes, she was extracted, though without the missing researcher. At debriefing, she described how she found an anomalous location under the ground beneath 783's victims' corpses, and she was so rattled by what she saw that she was granted a temporary leave of absence. The Foundation had to know more, and a D-Class personnel was quickly selected for exploration of the underground anomaly. D-2172 was equipped with audio and video recording equipment, along with several scientific measurement tools, as well as a firearm, and was lowered down into the pit via crane. Their wired tether to the surface would both send the information they collected back, as well as serve as their lifeline to the surface. As D-2172 was lowered past the mass of corpses into the darkness, they experienced a sense of vertigo, before it was realized that the anomalous effects extended to gravity as well, which had become reversed, and that they would need to start climbing up in order to descend further into the pit. They soon climbed out of the hole surrounded by the reaching, extended arms of corpses, and emerged into an open world with an overcast sky. It looked exactly like the town of Tembe, with the same buildings present there as in our world. The world appeared to be uninhabited, though, with no sign of the missing SCP Foundation researcher. D-2172 began investigating the buildings and found them all to be empty as well, though they did unfortunately find signs of a struggle in one house, with what looked to be evidence of the missing researcher's demise. They continued exploring the area and found that the anomalous properties of the location extended to its borders too. And as the D-Class walked north out of the town, after several kilometers, they found that they were now somehow back at the southern edge of the town. D-2172 was ordered to return to the entry point, but as they walked, they were suddenly impeded by the deformed body of an SCP-783 victim that stretched across the road in front of them. D-2172 drew and fired their weapon at the entity, but it didn't react, and they were forced to retreat into the nearby woods. After several minutes, they stopped to rest when they spotted something else. In the distance, the D-Class saw what looked to be a giant white birch tree, and it was coming towards them. As the living tree approached, it became clear that it wasn't a tree at all. What looked like branches were extended bony fingers that it was using to walk. The long, branch-like fingers were coming out of the top of the tree, where D-2172 could see their origin. These branches were the elongated fingers of the missing SCP Foundation researcher. D-2172 turned to run as the giant living tree chased them back into the town, firing their weapon at the creature whenever they had the chance, but was unable to stop it. The visual feed was soon lost as the audio continued to broadcast the screams of D-2172. But this wasn't the end of the expedition. The on-site team was surprised to witness after several hours that the tether was pulled on twice, the signal that it should be reeled in. A medical team was sent to the site, since it was assumed that D-2172 would need immediate care, and the team began reeling in the line. After several minutes, they spotted the harness that should have been strapped to D-2172, but with nothing in it. They continued to pull, but the harness became stuck on the mass of corpses in the pit. They then noticed that it wasn't actually stuck. There was a hand holding onto the harness for dear life. It was D-2172's hand. The team kept pulling as D-2172's arm kept stretching out of the pit to a length of over 3 meters. But eventually, the resistance became too much. D-2172 lost its grip, and it was seen sinking back into the mass of corpses inside the pit. Following this expedition, it was determined that only special operations teams and mobile task forces would be used to explore the dangerous anomalous location in the future. At least 3 such expeditions have been undertaken, though the details remain classified for the time being, and perhaps it is for the best if they remain so. The SCP Foundation will continue to monitor the town of Tembe in an attempt to learn more about SCP-783 and hopefully discover a means to contain it and its related phenomena. Due to the difficulty in containing the anomaly, it has been classified as Keter, and a local building adjacent to the Tembe Hospital has been requisitioned and designated as Provisional Site 5 in order to accommodate the increased Foundation presence. As the SCP Foundation continues to research this mysterious and highly dangerous anomaly, Any victims of SCP-463 are to be retrieved, their injuries cataloged, and then their bodies are to be incinerated.
July 18, 2014. The calm and peaceful tranquility of the day has just been disrupted by the squawk of a panicked report over the radio. Civilians in danger. Urgent assistance required. The park ranger hears the screams carried through the trees by the wind a second later, already hurtling his way toward the location given by his colleague. Something is very, very wrong. Usually nothing like this happens at Crater Lake National Park. His mind starts racing as fast as the Jeep he's driving, a brain entering survival mode, trying to predict every possible danger. A forest fire? It was still daylight. He'd have seen the smoke. An animal attack? Maybe. Bears could sometimes be seen roaming about on the fringes of the park, but they typically kept away from humans, especially the more people were around. And today, in the midst of July, there were plenty to ward off any strays. Every attempted prediction only raised the same question. Just what the hell was going on? Approaching the tree line, one of the other rangers waves down the car. She's armed. If the vagueness of the report hadn't been troubling enough, seeing another park ranger with a shotgun in her hands certainly was. They were in bear territory. It wasn't unheard of for one of them to occasionally need a gun to ward the bears off, but that was a rarity out at Crater Lake. Slamming the brakes and leaping out of the Jeep, the park ranger rushes towards his colleague as she takes cover behind a nearby tree. He immediately asks her what the situation is, but she urges him to be quiet. There's something out there with them, she tells him in a whisper, racking a live round into her shotgun. When the park ranger asks what, the other ranger shoots him a look. Her eyes say it all. She's terrified and confused. This isn't just a wild animal on a rampage or frightenedly defending its territory and cubs. She has no idea what it is. She can't even believe she's seen it, let alone start describing it. Twigs snap under the foot of something, causing the other ranger to raise her shotgun, leaning out from behind the tree in the direction of the noise. She scans the space a few feet beyond the barrel. Nothing. The park ranger takes a look for himself, not exactly eager to see what it is, but unable to fend off his own curiosity. He spots something, nothing more than a shape passing between the trees, almost mistaking it for a branch simply moving in the gentle breeze. He taps on the other ranger's shoulder and alerts her. Whatever it is, it's close, and it seems to be walking like a man. The other ranger looks. In a second, she raises her shotgun and fires. A blast of buckshot erupts from the barrel, causing a deafening, high-pitched ringing in the park ranger's ears. He doubles over, clutching his ears as the sound becomes physically painful, not realizing his colleague fumbling as she grabs a fresh cartridge, or the thing staggering towards them. That is, until he looks up, the moment his hearing returns. But before we go any further, I have a question for you. Does something feel wrong with you? Is something interfering with your happiness, or preventing you from achieving your goals? Regardless if you have a clinical mental health issue like depression or anxiety, or if you're just a human who lives in this world who's going through a hard time, therapy can give you tools to approach your life in a very different way. And that's why I'm excited to tell you about today's sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp's mission is to make therapy more affordable and more accessible, and this is an important mission because finding a therapist can be really hard, especially when you're limited to the options in your area. BetterHelp is a platform that makes finding a therapist easier because it's online. It's remote, and by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to a professional therapist in as little as a few days. It's easy to sign up and get matched with a therapist. There's a link in my description. It's betterhelp.com/DrBob. Clicking that link helps support this channel, but it also gets you 10% off your first month of BetterHelp, so you can connect with the therapist and see if it helps you. And because finding a therapist is a little like dating, if you don't really fit with that therapist, which is a common thing with therapy, you can easily switch to a new therapist at no additional cost, without stressing about insurance, who's in your network, or anything like that. So if you're struggling, consider online therapy with BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/DrBob. Thank you again, BetterHelp, for supporting this channel. Now back to the bizarre creature in the forest. It's like part of the forest has come to life and assumed the shape of a human being in order to attack them. Roots cover its body, sealing up the space where its eyes would be. Oregon-beaked moss coats its arms and hangs off it like it's been draped in a sheet of yellowy-green plants. The creature is horrible to look at, and yet it looks lost. It stumbles, arms outstretched like it's trying to blindly feel its way around. and the park ranger realizes it can't see. Another cartridge clicks into the shotgun tube, pulled back the chamber by the slide of the pump, and the other ranger raises the weapon, steadying her aim so as not to miss this time. Her sights line up, the mossy monstrosity sitting in the center, and her fingers squeezes on the trigger. An unexpected force from below pushes the barrel of the shotgun upwards, pointing it towards the treetops. Another ear-splitting blast rings out, sending nearby birds flying from their nests in panic. The park ranger keeps the weapon pointed up, despite his colleagues' protests to let go of her gun, or the drops of blood dripping out and trailing down his neck from his own eardrums. He glances over his shoulder as, whatever it is, flees in terror. Startled by the shotgun blast, it runs away between the trees, knocking into some as it moves with uncertainty. Minutes later, a team of other rangers arrives, declaring that they're taking over the search effort for the creature that was found lurking around Crater Lake National Park. These rangers seem off. They look the part, in full uniforms and everything, but the park ranger can't place their faces. They somehow seem brand new, yet not one of them is fazed by the unusual situation. They seemed all the more interested in questioning all the hikers and families visiting the park who had seen the creature, as they were in actually finding it. It was almost as if they didn't want the word getting out. The park ranger decides he can't keep quiet any longer and raises a concern to the newcomers. He tells them that he doesn't think whatever is out there is some kind of monster. He thinks it's human. The new rangers thank him for his input, but insist that they'll take it from here. Little did he know, these weren't other park rangers. They were agents of the SCP Foundation. They have been embedded within the National Park's rangers to contain SCP-463, an anomalous log floating in Crater Lake, said to contain a powerful deity named Yao, who can cause dangerous weather to erupt unless the log is left to float freely. Then the call comes in from SCP Foundation Command, reports of an entity attacking civilians. Since they happen to be nearby, in the same park no less, a handful of agents are sent in to investigate and, if possible, contain the creature. Before too long, the civilian witnesses, even the real park rangers who had tried to kill the entity, have all been interviewed, administered with memory-wiping amnestics, and subsequently released, as if nothing out of the ordinary has even happened. Putting boots to the ground, the search for the unidentified creature doesn't last long. Within 2 hours, the agents have found what they're looking for. Only, it's not a creature. It's a person. His name is Zach Herman. They find him cowering under an alcove near the edge of the lake, his moss-covered skin providing a near-perfect camouflage for him to blend in with his woodland surroundings. The only thing that gives him away is the sound of his frightened sobs. The Foundation agents aren't under orders to neutralize him on sight. Instead, they humanely subdue Zach Herman and arrange to have him taken to a nearby Foundation outpost for examination. SCP-463, an anomalous humanoid entity known to inhabit a rundown Blockbuster video rental store in the nearby town of Bend, Oregon, with the area having been sealed off and constantly patrolled by Foundation personnel. So that seems like the best place to take Zach and figure out exactly what happened to him. Upon closer examination at the Foundation outpost, it's discovered that Zach Herman has a number of unidentified roots growing through both his skin and internal organs. Given the danger to his life that this poses, he's rushed into an operating theater to undergo emergency surgery. 18 hours pass as the Foundation tries to save the man's life. At this time, the surgeons decide that it isn't wise or possible to remove all the roots at once, so instead, they focus on clearing the ones that had grown within and over his eyes, nostrils, ear canals, and throat. Another 7 hours of intensive surgery pass, and Zach Herman is still alive. He's not cured, but the roots covering much of his face have at least been cleared. After stabilizing, it's then that he's transferred to Site 56, where the Foundation intends to conduct further operations to remove the growths from his body, as well as ask Zach questions about what happened to him. They're still baffled as to what caused his anomalous mutation into a moss monster. Just where had these roots come from? And what exactly was SCP-7185? Researcher Charlie Canley is tasked with conducting interviews with the subject, Zach Herman, between his various procedures, and she wastes no time in unearthing his story. Oak Ridge, Oregon, 60 miles north of Crater Lake National Park, where Zach will eventually be found. That's where he describes the horrific mutation taking place. Given that the roots would grow over his eyes, his vision impaired, he has no idea where he's going until he eventually winds up in Crater Lake. Scared, alone, and changed beyond recognition. And as he describes it, he wasn't the only one. Shortly before his own mutation, Zach mentions witnessing the same happening to Kellen Herman, his husband. The couple, along with a group of several others, are in a small Oregon town reached by traveling to Hills Creek Lake, then following Hills Creek Road south until finding a road sign simply labeled Beard. The place has spent 70 years in ruins, abandoned, and left to be overtaken by the elements. Most of the roads leading into the area are blocked off thanks to a landslide, leaving the town completely void of all human life. Until Zach and his friends arrive in Beard. There are 6 of them in total, including Zach, his husband Kellen, then Azrael, Mark, Angel, and Caleb. Answering an ad on Craigslist, the group has come to Beard after being hired by a man named Sean to scavenge through the abandoned town, collecting anything that could potentially be of value. Scrap metal and intact valuables, as long as they can be resold, are worth holding on to. While the group searches, Sean delivers food and supplies to them once per month. One thing that they hope for each time, but never seem to get, is something to drink in their downtime. So on a whim, while exploring an abandoned factory they come across, Zach looks for an alternative source of beer for the group to enjoy. What he finds is an unusual blue machine. Pulling levers on it, he finds that it dispenses samples of a surprisingly green liquid. Of course, none of the group immediately drinks it. Not until Angel finds an old journal with entries dating back to the 1930s. It describes the owners of the factory giving the liquid to their workers and only ceasing the practice after the workers stopped getting drunk. Taking that to mean the liquid was safe to drink, the group decided to each take a swig of the green. Initially, none of them feel any change. It's actually rather anticlimactic, at least at first. Soon after, however, they start to feel energized, more alert, and awake for much longer without feeling the usually expected fatigue that would bring. It even helps them search through parts of the town quicker, something they're all grateful for. After a week, not one of them even feels the need to sleep. They were even healing from injuries faster, small cuts were sealing in minutes, bruises clearing entirely almost as quickly as they formed. After about a month, the negative side effects start. They start manifesting as small symptoms, the group experiencing various bodily aches that gradually become far, far worse. It affects each of them differently too. Zach starts to experience a tightness in his chest, while Caleb develops a bad fever that leaves him barely able to function. Mark and Angel's hair starts falling out in thick clumps too. Soon after, the same is happening to Caleb. His symptoms are the first to worsen. After his hair falls out, his skin starts to do the same. It keeps peeling away, turning red. Then, Sean arrives in Beard. According to the information given by Zach in his interviews with the Foundation, their employer would routinely drive to the town every 3 months in order to pick up anything valuable the group has recovered. All of them suffering from the ill effects of whatever the liquid they'd all drank was. Those of the group that still had the strength to stand rushed to meet Sean and beg him to get them help. Upon taking one look at them, he drives away, abandoning them. 4 days after Sean left them there, the sleepless group is startled by screaming in the night. It's Caleb, and he's on fire. Panicking, the others try to help, pouring water on him to douse the flames. It seems to work, but it's only a few minutes before the fire starts up again. They even try taking him to the creek that runs through the town, but submerging Caleb in the water only causes his skin to form massive blisters that painfully burst. Keeping him under didn't work either. He kept needing to come up for air, and breaking the surface, he started catching fire again the second he was above water. There was nothing they could do to save him. He just kept burning. Caleb is the first of the group to die. It's not clear when this occurred. Investigating the area, the Foundation recovers fragmented journal entries written by Azrael, in which the others all attribute Caleb's death to him having a weak immune system. But normally, diseases don't cause people to spontaneously catch fire. By the morning, he is almost completely burned, leaving only a charred corpse that the group buries by the factory. Following Caleb's death, Zach is forced to leave. The others blame him for Caleb's death, and he does as well. He intends to find some other way of getting help for the rest of the group. Kellen joins him, and the couple leave Beard together. Meanwhile, Angel, Mark, and Azrael search for their own way out of the town, but to no avail. Hardly any of the roads are accessible on foot, and those that are just lead to abandoned properties on the woodland outskirts of Beard. According to Azrael's journal entry, they then refocused their efforts towards finding a cure for whatever it was they had drunk. It's not much more successful. During Zach and Kellen's absence, Mark is the next group member whose symptoms start to get worse. His hair was almost entirely gone, and soon, rashes started to form over his skin before peeling away. Immediately, he and the other two start to fear that what happened to Caleb might be about to happen to Mark, too. Their only plan is for Mark to stay out in the snow if he starts catching fire in the same way, since, by this point, winter had reached Oregon. But instead of a reoccurrence of Caleb's condition, Mark's skin begins repeatedly forming an unusual bluish-green substance, warm to the touch. It accumulates every few hours, and Angel and Azrael help him scrape it off before it ultimately returns. Within days, it's returning faster, too fast for them to clear it. So much of it forms that it starts dripping off Mark. Then Angel points out it seems to be candle wax, and the more of it, the hotter it gets. Shortly after, the substance burns out Mark's eyes. He's completely covered in scalding hot wax, with no way of removing it entirely. Eventually, he dies. Angel and Azrael can't move his body thanks to the wax, as more of it keeps forming, nor can they bury him yet thanks to a snowstorm outside. It's only a week later that Azrael thinks he sees the body moving. Mark is still alive. He's been lying in a pile of hot wax the entire time, his body still making more. Soon, he stops moving altogether. While all this is happening, Kellen and Zach are still trying to find help, but manage to wind up lost in the woods surrounding Beard. The numerous overlapping and confusing paths surrounding the town had meant one wrong turn sends both of them heading towards the woods, with only a few cans of food, a lighter, and a pocket knife between them. After a week, they pass a mountain that Zach assumes is the Diamond Peak volcano. Another week later, both he and Kellen are beginning to suffer their own severe symptoms from the liquid they consumed. Kellen is vomiting shards of metal and glass. Further metallic chunks were breaking through Kellen's skin as they grew within his body. At the same time, roots grow over Zach's eyes, preventing him from fully seeing just what is happening to his husband. They sit together in Kellen's dying moments, Zach feeling like he needs to be there for his partner, even though he can't see him or do anything to help him. A few hours after Kellen's breathing eventually stops, Zach walks through the woods until he hears the sound of cars, only to be found in Crater Lake National Park. Around the same time, Angel also dies. It takes him a whole week after his eyelids and fingernails fall out, followed by every layer of his skin. It would happen multiple times, thanks to the effects of the green liquid causing him to recover. Also, his skin could once again come off. At one point, Azrael, horrified by it all, sees his friend's face fall off. Still unable to find a way out of Beard, one of the remaining two survivors of the group also starts to change. Bumps form under Azrael's skin, eventually causing his hands to become swollen and preventing him from moving anything below his chest. Aware of his impending fate, he stashes the journal he's been writing in inside a backpack and leaves it for whoever finds them. The Foundation is able to recover the bodies of Azrael, Angel, Mark, and the buried remains of Caleb within Beard, but they decline to share this information with Zach. Sean's identity is confirmed to be that of Sean McDougal, and Foundation agents are sent to interrogate him. They aren't able to ascertain any valuable information from him, so instead amnesticize him. Anything saved on Sean's devices relating to the location of the town of Beard, the group he hired to scavenge there, and the $46,000 he'd made from the scavenged goods are all seized. SCP-7185 consists of two elements. The first is an unidentified machine that was uncovered by Zach Herman and his friends in an abandoned factory in the southern Cascadian mountain range of Oregon. Despite not having any power sources connected to it, SCP-7185 seemingly functions without the need for electricity. It is instead operated via a series of levers connected to the main body of the device. Two are black and one is rusted over. Should both of the black levers be switched downwards and the rusty lever pulled, the machine will produce the second element of this anomaly, designated by the Foundation as SCP-7185-1, hereby alternatively known as the body horror juice. The alcoholic liquid byproduct of activating SCP-7185 is green in color and has a semi-viscous consistency. If this liquid is drunk at any point by a human being, then this person will undergo major bodily changes that tend to span a period of at least several weeks. Anyone ingesting SCP-7185-1 will suffer numerous mutations and deformations of their body, although exactly how they are altered varies depending on the person drinking the juice. SCP-7185-1 also negates the effects of any depressants, opiates, or other stimulants taken after ingestion, meaning there is no way to nullify the pain of these intense physical changes. On July 21, 2014, Zach Herman died due to complications during surgery. The Foundation surgeons had been making extensive efforts to clear the roots growing throughout his body as a result of Herman ingesting SCP-7185. They had made enough of a difference to allow him to participate in interviews with researcher Canley. However, during these exchanges, Zach mentions that he can still feel everything that is happening to him during the procedures. Every incision, every removal, every stitch. The same day, the body of Zach's husband, Kellen Herman, is also recovered.
A man wakes up with a start. Did something just bite him? He looks down at his hand. Something definitely bit him. He can see the red welt already forming. He looks around for the culprit, but can't find it anywhere. He really hopes he doesn't have bed bugs. That's the last thing he needs right now. He'll have to keep his eyes open for potential pests. He doesn't want this to happen again, since the spot is already starting to itch and feel uncomfortable. A couple days pass, though, with no signs of other bugs. It must have just been a random insect that came inside his house to escape the winter cold. The spot on his hand felt a little rough for a day or two, but now he's pretty much forgotten all about it. Now what he really needs is some coffee before sitting down to another coding session. The man is in his kitchen trying to make a fresh pot of coffee, but finds he's having a hard time. He's not so much making coffee as he is making a mess. He knocks his favorite mug onto the ground, breaking it, and decides that maybe he doesn't need coffee after all. A couple of nights later, as the man is watching TV, he starts to cough. Just a little at first, but then more and more. The coughing fits get longer and deeper too, like they are coming from the very bottom of his lungs. He hopes he isn't coming down with something. He hasn't left the house in days, so how could he have? Can bugs transfer colds? He'll have to look it up later. For now, he needs to do something about this cough. He won't be able to sleep if it keeps up. He needs to go get some medicine. The man gets bundled up and heads out. It's lightly snowing as he walks to the pharmacy, and he can't help but admire the way the moon hangs in the sky, a beautiful beacon of light on this dark winter evening. Inside the pharmacy, he finds the cold medicine section and picks out a cough suppressant. He takes it to the counter and decides to get a few candy bars too. He's developed a real sweet tooth these last few days. The man starts to cough again. It's a good thing he's getting this medicine. Several more days pass, and the man isn't feeling any better. This cough just won't go away. He decides it's finally time to go see a doctor. As he sits in the doctor's office waiting room, he does his best to hold in his coughs, but he has a very hard time. The woman on the other side of the room is coughing too. Strangely, it actually makes him feel a little better. There must just be something going around. A nurse comes into the waiting room and calls his name. The doctor is ready for him. The man is sitting on the bed in the examination room when the doctor enters. He's looking over his medical records and doesn't even look up from his clipboard. He tells the man to take off his shirt so that he can be examined, and the man obliges. "Okay, let's see what the trouble is," the doctor says. He finally looks up at the man and screams. It didn't take long for the SCP Foundation to hear the reports of people's limbs metamorphosing into insectoid appendages, and they knew immediately what they were dealing with. This was another outbreak of the parasitic, limb-transforming insect known as SCP-150. SCP-150 is an obligate parasite, meaning that it requires a host for the completion of its reproductive life cycle. It bears a visual appearance similar to that of Cymathoa exigua, another parasite that eats the tongue of a particular type of fish before replacing the tongue with its own body. SCP-150 engages in similar behavior, though it appears to exclusively affect humans. When a human comes in contact with a small bug-like organism, it will embed itself under its new host's skin. Next, over the course of roughly 7 days, SCP-150 will burrow deep into the host's flesh and begin to cause numerous physiological changes to them. First, and most prominently, SCP-150 will begin a gradual process of altering the limb that is nearest to the original infection site. As SCP-150 burrows deeper and consumes the flesh, it excretes a substance that has the effect of replacing the missing sections of the limb with a hard, chitinous material that resembles one of its own appendages. Beneath the chitin, the excreted substance forms a rudimentary nervous system that gives the host the ability to control the new limb as if it were their own. As it feeds, SCP-150 also secretes several chemicals that contain anesthetic, immunosuppressant, and transplant-rejecting properties that keep the host's body from responding to the changes, or even reacting at all. In fact, the host will often report that their new limb is completely normal and feels stronger and more resilient after the transformation. SCP-150 will continue to feed for approximately 1 to 2 weeks, and as it feeds on the nutrients within its host's body, it will begin to reproduce, creating eggs that it deposits directly into the bloodstream. While the majority of these eggs will die off, enough usually survive to begin colonizing other parts of the host's body, where they will hatch and repeat the process of feeding, reproducing, and spreading more eggs. It is theorized that it is capable of reproducing on its own, meaning that a single instance of SCP-150 is all it takes to create a new colony. Humans infected with SCP-150 will sometimes report slight discomfort and issues with their fine motor skills during this period, but will usually not express any knowledge of what might be causing this. Eventually, SCP-150 eggs will reach the host's lungs, where the process of assimilating continues, this time replacing the lungs themselves. During this process, more eggs will be produced, laid, and then spread out of the body by the host's coughing. As many as 10,000 eggs will be produced during this period, approximately 1% of which will survive being expelled, find another host, and implant themselves. The assimilation process then spreads to the central nervous system, including the spinal cord and brain, but strangely, the host will show no signs that their consciousness or behavior have been affected in any way. In interviews with hosts of SCP-150, those who are unaware that they are infected have not expressed any knowledge of changes happening in or out of their body. When subjects are made aware that they have been infected, they will be able to point out the site of the original infection and agree that a change has taken place, but they seem to have no ill will towards their new chitinous appendages and will often express positive feelings about it. In order to better study the effects of SCP-150 under SCP Foundation control, 2 D-Class personnel, D-13732 and D-016002, were both infected with the parasites, and the assimilation process was allowed to fully progress through all the stages. Following signs that D-016002 was experiencing swelling of the brain, a decompressive craniotomy was performed, a procedure in which a portion of the skull is removed in order to relieve pressure on the brain. This surgery had the added benefit of giving Foundation researchers the chance to look at SCP-150's progress firsthand. But after a flap of her skull was removed, the attending scientists did not find that her brain was swelling. They didn't find her brain at all, but instead observed numerous instances of SCP-150 in the cavity where her brain should be. The D-Class had been partially anesthetized to numb her skull but remained conscious during the procedure, and the scientists asked her several simple questions to which she was perfectly able to answer. They began removing some of the parasites, and as they did so, her answers became slower and less clear. It appeared that the SCP-150 instances had not just eaten and replaced her brain, they had become her brain. For the next experiment, they would use the instances of SCP-150 that had been removed from D-13732's nervous system after he had been euthanized following the discovery that his entire nervous system had also been replaced entirely by SCP-150. The parasites taken from his brain cavity were placed into D-016002's, and the results were nothing short of incredible. After observing a period of time where the organisms appeared to move and rearrange themselves within her skull, she regained consciousness. Once awake, not only did her cognitive functions immediately improve, when she was asked to state her name, she told them it was Michael, D-13732's name. It is unknown why SCP-150 engages in this peculiar life cycle, but the danger it poses to humans and the difficulty in keeping it contained has led the SCP Foundation to classify it as Keter. Some of the more erudite researchers have taken to calling the parasite the ship of Theseus, a play on the philosophical notion that questions whether something that has had all of its parts replaced is still fundamentally the same, or if it has become something new. Perhaps the observation of those infected with SCP-150 can shed some light on this millennia-old question. Infected patients who are being studied are to be kept in Level 3 biohazard containment cells, with never more than one infected host per cell. Cultures of SCP-150 adults and eggs are kept in vacuum-sealed glass flasks in the Site-42 Infectious Materials Lab, and the Foundation's standard pathogen handling procedures are required to be followed at all times. Should any instance of SCP-150 be found outside of containment, it is to be immediately incinerated. It's Saturday night, and a teenaged boy and girl are out on a date. They are strolling through a shopping mall with plans to see a movie later at the theater attached to the mall. As they walk through the mall waiting for their show to start, the girl spots something. It's a photo booth. She excitedly grabs the boy's hand and pulls him inside. They close the curtain, insert a coin, and the machine comes to life, snapping a series of photos. The two exit the booth, but both seem to be a little off. It's getting close to showtime, though, so they start making their way to the movie theater. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to the mall patrons, something is happening deep below the ground. The boy and girl exit the theater and walk arm in arm through the alley back toward the parking lot where the boy left his car. It's late now. The sun has long since set, and they're all alone. But they don't hear the footsteps behind them, or sense the pair of bodies that are following them, getting closer and closer. They get to the car. It's the only one left in the parking lot, and the boy takes out his keys to unlock the car when he fumbles and drops them to the ground. As he bends over to pick them up, he finally sees who has been following them. It's them, a pair of doppelgangers coming straight towards them. They look exactly like the boy and girl, except for their faces, which are horribly distorted, with strange lumps and no eyes or mouths. They look as though they were a drawing of a face that was somehow smudged out. The boy quickly gets the keys and grabs the girl, dragging her away from the creatures, who are now reaching for the boy and girl, grasping and clawing at their faces as they try to moan through their skin-covered mouths. He gets the car unlocked, and both manage to get inside. As the creatures bang on the windows, the boy starts the engine and drives away, leaving the abominations behind. Hi, I'm DrBob, and this is SCP-715, also known as My Face That I May Be. SCP-715 is a take-your-own-photo brand photo booth, a product of the Sony Corporation made in the 1970s. This is a standard-looking photo booth, bearing a close resemblance to the many thousands of others that were in operation around the world at the time, with no anomalous visual characteristics at all. The only detail setting this machine apart from its countless brethren is a small metal tag which has been added to the back of the machine at some point, but a significant amount of wear has made it impossible to read what, if anything, was ever stamped on the tag. SCP-715's basic operation is also not anomalous in appearance. It will only activate if an individual sits inside and inserts the required coinage, at which point it will take a series of photos, just like a normal photo booth. The photos will also appear normal, though often some will be heavily distorted and obscure the subject's face in various ways. What truly sets this photo booth apart, however, is what happens outside of the booth when the pictures are taken. While the individuals who had their photos taken, classified as SCP-715-B instances, are able to exit the booth with no obvious effects, below the mall, deep underground, something truly terrifying takes place. Underneath the mall is Site-81715, an extra-dimensional space which is accessible through a mall maintenance service door located in Sub-Basement 3, a door that does not appear on any of the mall's structural blueprints or in other records. The site consists of a giant cavernous room, which appears to have been hewn right out of the surrounding limestone. In the middle of the room is its most distinguishing feature, a large, deep pit. The walls of the pit are made of an unidentified substance, though it appears similar in both appearance and composition to human fat tissue. These fleshy walls secrete a powerful, corrosive substance, which makes examination and exploration of the pit particularly dangerous. When SCP-715 is activated in the mall above, a humanoid creature, classified as SCP-715-A, will appear in this pit. The bodies of these creatures are similar in appearance to the individuals who had their picture taken inside of 715, but their faces are radically different. Each has severe facial disfigurements and abnormalities, such as large growths, deep lacerations, and the absence of facial features. After appearing in the pit, these SCP-715-A instances will attempt to scale the fleshy walls of the pit and leave Site-81-715. These instances are considered hostile, and Foundation security personnel are authorized to neutralize the creatures by any means necessary. Further research into how the SCP-715-A entities are formed and what exactly the pit is are ongoing, and it's not currently known how many 715-A instances exist down in the pit. With the entities who were able to climb out of the pit able to be relatively easily neutralized by security forces, SCP-715 was originally classified as safe. It was contained at its point of origin within the mall in Ohio, and Foundation personnel posing as mall employees would collect the photos printed by the machine. However, following additional discoveries, this classification necessitated changing. The Foundation began noticing inconsistencies with SCP-715-B entities after a researcher tested SCP-715 himself by sitting inside and having his photo taken. Soon after, he began acting in ways that were considered strange, such as when he turned down a promotion to a prominent position with better pay and perks for seemingly no reason, and when he skipped a mandatory site inspection for reality-bending anomalies. After noticing these strange behaviors, a Foundation research head had an anomalous optical enhancement device placed in the oddly acting researcher's bedroom and learned a surprising truth about the SCP-715-A and B entities. The Foundation had been killing the wrong ones. The device, which could remove anomalous reality-distorting effects from images, showed that the researcher was actually one of the creatures from the pit, with the telltale facial distortions. Following this shocking revelation, the research head used the same device on the creatures still inside the pit underneath the mall. They found that when the anomalous visual effects were removed from the distorted creatures who were trying to get out of the fleshy pit, that they were actually normal-looking humans. These SCP-715-A entities were the human beings who had entered the photo booth, had their pictures taken, and were somehow transported to the pit. They had been trying to escape their prison and tell the Foundation who they really were, but this only resulted in them being terminated by the on-site security forces. In order to fix this mistake, SCP-715 was hastily reclassified as Keter, and SCP-715 was removed from the mall in order to be stored in a secure locker at Site-19. Research personnel were no longer able to access SCP-715 without special authorization, and study of the interior was limited to what could be done via remote drone use only. The Foundation began rounding up all known instances of SCP-715-B, who were now the ones subjected to immediate termination. Foundation staff did manage to interview one 715-B instance, though, who had been previously believed to be a fellow Foundation researcher. It is unknown exactly what the researcher doppelganger said in that interview, but it must have been extremely serious, as the end result was another complete change in protocol. All attempts to contain and neutralize instances of SCP-715-B would immediately cease, since if there were as many out in the world as the doppelganger claimed, then ultimately, it would better maintain normalcy and ensure the secrecy of SCP-715 if they were allowed to go free. Sadly, the same was not the case for the SCP-715-A instances that still existed down in the pit. The researcher doppelganger advised that it would be unwise to remove them from the pit, and the current Foundation policy is that down in the pit is where they will remain. Following this interview, SCP-715 was reclassified once again as safe. The photo booth was also moved again, this time to a maximum security storage locker at Site-81, and Foundation personnel have been prohibited from interacting with SCP-715-B instances at all. However, there is one more piece of information about SCP-715, and it is only accessible to those with proper security clearance. Another Foundation agent was found to actually be an instance of SCP-715-B and taken into custody for observation. While under surveillance, it was discovered that this instance, classified as SCP-715-B7, was emitting low-level radiation that was somehow directed at Site-81-715, the location of the pit. During an autopsy of the creature, it was found that the radioactive emissions were actually increasing in output and frequency, and soon after, a power outage and containment breach occurred at the site where the autopsy took place. Following these events, the body of SCP-715-B7 disappeared, and video surveillance confirmed that several members of Foundation staff were responsible, all of whom had been involved in SCP-715 research. The staff members escaped with the body and left no other evidence behind, save for a single photo with the ominous text, "My ears that I may hear, my eyes that I may see, my mouth that I may speak. Do not touch my face." No other information regarding SCP-715 has been found, and many questions remain. Just what are instances of 715-B, and what do they want? Are they some kind of hive mind colony that reproduces through the use of a mysterious photo booth? What happens to those left behind in the pit? And what will they do should they ever get out?
Tell me if it starts to hurt, the dentist says before reaching into your mouth with a pair of orthodontic pliers and starting to pull your front teeth back into place. Evidently, your screams aren't enough of an indication of the extreme pain you feel because he doesn't stop pulling. After what feels like hours of excruciating oral surgery, you're finally standing outside the dentist's office texting with a friend. "Come on, show me. It can't be that bad," reads the message from your friend. You're nervous to send her a picture, though, since you have a small crush on the girl and you don't want her to see you in this state. But after she asks you again, you decide to take a quick selfie and send it to her anyway. You snap a photo of your mangled mouth and jaw. The mess of wires had to be hastily applied to move your remaining crooked teeth back into place with globs of fast-hardening epoxy, and the result looks like a low-budget horror movie prosthetic. You send the message and wait. You watch the dots appear that indicate she's writing a response, then watch as they disappear without a reply. You sadly slip the phone back into your pocket and begin walking away. As you make your way home with your head hung in shame, you keep your mouth shut tight. You don't want any passers-by to see what you've become. You decide to detour through the park to avoid any people as much as possible, and as you walk, you decide to stop at a picnic table next to a small pond. You sit at the table and watch the ducks mill about in the water. They have it so lucky, you think. Ducks never have to worry about their teeth getting knocked out by a baseball and leaving them looking like a monster. The ducks suddenly all start moving away from your side of the pond, eventually taking flight and leaving completely. You get the sense that they're trying to get away from something, and you turn around, but there's nothing behind you. Oh, it must be me, you think. But then you get the sense that there is something behind you, and turn again. Still though, there's nothing. It's just you, the picnic table, and the empty pond. You turn back to watch the still water, but you can't shake the feeling that there's someone behind you, and turn again. "Hello? Is anyone there?" you ask, but no one answers. You turn back to the pond and you scream in fright at the thing standing before you and fall back off the picnic table. You get up out of the dirt and you don't wait to stick around to see who or what this thing is. You start to run as fast as you can, but you immediately hear it chasing after you. Instinctually, you take out your phone and start trying to take pictures of whatever it is that's behind you. You know no one will ever believe you, and you want some evidence of this thing. You manage to snap off a couple of pictures, but you can hear the creature gaining on you. You scream as your mouth begins to ache. Perhaps running this soon after your surgery is causing your damaged teeth to shift, and the pain is intense. It starts to feel like your mouth is full of jagged rocks, but you can feel that it is your teeth pushing out and stabbing into your mouth. You take one last picture before the creature leaps on you, sending you both to the ground, and your phone tumbling into the dirt. Early the next morning, a police perimeter has been set up in the park. The detective arrives and walks past the traumatized-looking jogger who must have been the one that discovered the grisly scene. An officer guarding the site lifts up the police tape so the detective can enter the crime scene that surrounds a body lying under a white sheet. The detective asks the officer if they've found anything yet, and the officer hands the detective a plastic bag containing a dirty cell phone. The detective puts on a latex glove and removes the phone from the bag. The screen is cracked, but it still works. There's numerous messages on the screen that look like they're from someone trying to apologize for not responding sooner, and asking where the phone's owner is and if they're mad at her. The detective opens the phone's camera app and starts looking at the last photos that were taken. It's a strange series of pictures. They seem to all be selfies that a young man was taking as he ran through the park. It almost appears as though there's a figure behind him, but it's hard to tell. There's a foggy white vignette on the pictures that gets worse the further he looks, slowly closing in until the last photo is nothing but a blurred milky white screen. The detective flips the phone over and looks at the lens, which you can see is completely covered in a hard white substance. The detective places the phone back in the evidence bag and kneels down next to the body. The police officer turns away. He's already seen the victim and doesn't need to again. The detective pulls down the sheet to reveal a truly shocking sight. The boy's mouth is a mess of teeth, far, far too many teeth. There are teeth growing out of every part of his gums at horrible angles, filling his mouth and jutting out at painfully odd angles. Who could have done this? What could have done this? The local police department may not have had any idea what the state of this victim meant, but the SCP Foundation did, because they had seen the same occurrence dozens of times before. In fact, they had seen it happen so many times that they had classified this anomalous entity as SCP-4910, but it had already earned a much more ominous nickname within the Foundation. It was known as the Grinner. Very little is known about SCP-4910, and eyewitness accounts of the creature are all extremely brief due to those who have interacted with it quickly succumbing to its effects. What is known is that SCP-4910 is a quadruped and appears to be made partially, or perhaps entirely, out of teeth. Those who encounter SCP-4910 quickly experience its primary anomalous effect, which is that it causes the extremely rapid overproduction of teeth in its victims' mouths. Existing teeth will quickly increase in size, protruding farther out of the gums than should be able, while new teeth will begin to sprout from any available space in the mouth, including the roof of the mouth and underneath the tongue. These new teeth will completely fill the mouth, which almost immediately inhibits their ability to speak or vocalize at all. The creature will then use this opportunity to attack and incapacitate the victim before starting to feed. Further adding to the mystery of SCP-4910's appearance comes from the effect it has on any nearby recording equipment. Cameras and other devices that come within SCP-4910's proximity will have their critical components compromised by a sudden appearance of a layer of dentin, which is the calcified material that partially makes up teeth. Interestingly, SCP-4910 seems to possess some level of intelligence, as it appears able to differentiate between normal civilians, who it hunts for sustenance, and members of organizations that seek to hunt down and contain or harm it, which it uses for an even more nefarious purpose. While the exact mechanics are still unclear, it seems as though SCP-4910 is able to infect certain anomalous organization members with its ability, causing them to act as a vector for the effect, who then spread it to even more victims. This effect is, of course, of great concern to the Foundation, and containment protocols for infected victims have been hastily put into place. Should a member of staff begin bearing a grin with too many teeth or multiple tooth-filled smiles, they are to be immediately immobilized by any means necessary, though preferably with a firearm that allows one to keep an appropriate distance and hopefully prevent any further spread of the effect. The infected individual is then to be doused in a hydrochloric chemical compound that will reduce the afflicted to a pulp-like substance. Once this pulp is no longer animate, it can be transferred to the closest incineration site for disposal. Should a member of personnel have an interaction with SCP-4910 and feel that they were exposed to its anomalous effects, they may be saved by taking immediate medical action. Oral surgery to remove the additional teeth has been found to be effective when the procedure is undergone in the first 1 to 2 hours following exposure, though the victim will suffer lifelong permanent physical issues from the procedure. Once 3 hours have passed, the effect will have spread to the rest of the body, with teeth appearing virtually anywhere. Unfortunately for the victim, should the infection reach this point, pain management has been shown to be ineffective, and there is nothing that can be done to alleviate their suffering, save for termination. SCP-4910 remains at large and has been given the Keter classification. Mobile Task Force Epsilon, codenamed Turfing Black, is the only MTF authorized to respond to sightings, and they have been given permission to engage the creature and utilize lethal force if necessary, due to the danger this anomaly presents specifically to the SCP Foundation. What was that? The man and woman's hike through a gently rolling portion of the Rocky Mountains has just taken a turn for the dangerous. "There's something there in the bush," the man tells her before stepping in front of her in a defensive pose. They watch the bush intently. There's a slight rustling of the leaves as if something is inside. The man picks up a stick from the ground and holds it in front of him, ready to strike whatever fearsome beast is lurking in the underbrush. The rustling stops, but the man doesn't move from his protective stance. "Do you think it's gone?" the woman asks. The man isn't sure. He leans in towards the bush, searching for signs of what might be hiding inside when... Ah! The man screams and falls backwards as the creature emerges from the bush. "Aw!" the woman cries. "It's a pika!" She kneels down to get a closer look at the adorable little creature. Pikas are native to this part of Colorado, and they resemble rabbits but with small, rounded ears. She watches it hop back off the trail before turning around to see her friend lying tangled in the branches of a tree. She can't help but laugh as she offers a hand to help pull him out of his predicament. "Are you all right?" she asks between fits of laughter. Yes, he's fine. The only thing hurt was his pride. He notices a small red spot on his arm and rubs it, but it doesn't seem to hurt at all. His attention is diverted by the woman, though, who is marveling at the tree he was just stuck in. Free of the branches, he can appreciate now that the tree really is incredible. It looks like a huge blue spruce, but the name is a complete misnomer, because this tree is a vibrant red color. "I've never seen anything like it," she says, and the man hasn't either. Neither knows what species it is, and, strangely, there don't seem to be any others like it. Maybe this is the result of an odd genetic defect that turns blue spruces red. After admiring the tree for a moment, the pair decides that they've hiked far enough and that they should probably head back to the car. She jokes that he's likely exhausted from his run-in with a wild animal, and he laughs, but clearly his ego has been bruised. The man stops his car in front of the woman's house, and she thanks him for taking her on the hike. As she starts to get out, though, he stops her. He asks if she wants to go do something else, like dinner? The woman thanks him for his offer, but she has to be up early the next day for work. Just a quick drink then? An hour? 30 minutes? The woman tries her best to let her friend down easy, explaining that she likes him as a friend and as only that. The man opens his mouth to respond, but she stops him. If he valued their friendship, then he wouldn't try to take advantage of it by using it as a backdoor to dating her. The man again looks like his pride has been shattered. He apologizes and admits that she is right. It's just that he has such a good time with her that he never wants it to end. She gives him a sad smile as she closes the car door, and he watches her enter her house before he finally drives away. It's 2 weeks later when the man's phone rings. It's his friend. She explains that she's been thinking a lot about what he said in the car and that she likes spending time with him too. Maybe there could be something more to their relationship. The man can't believe it. Is this really happening? The woman is serious. She'd like to take him up on that dinner offer, if he's still interested. Her treat. She wants to know what he is doing right. Ah! The man suddenly yelps in pain. Is he okay? What was that sound? Yes, I'm fine. It was nothing, the man tells her. It's just that now's not a good time. The woman doesn't understand. She thought he'd want to see her. She explains that she's leaving town for a work trip the next day and will be gone for a couple of weeks. She was hoping she could see him before she left, but the man cries out in pain again. He tells her that he hasn't been feeling well all day, but that he'll be all right. Okay, well, get well soon. I'll call you when I get back. They exchange goodbyes, and the man hangs up the phone. The man looks terrible. His skin is pale, and his face looks hollow and gaunt. He looks down at his arm and sees that the veins themselves appear to be moving, pulsing, and vibrating. He screams again in agony and falls to the floor, clutching his arm. After writhing on the floor, he manages to summon the strength to reach for the phone. His hand searches on the table above him, and eventually he's able to knock it onto the floor. He grabs the phone and starts to dial. 911. Before he can press 1 again, another wave of intense searing pain consumes him. Several weeks later, the woman is standing outside the man's house. Mail and newspapers are piled up on his front porch, as if no one has been in or out in some time. She knocks on the door, but there's no response. Hello? She calls out, but still nothing. She's very worried. She's tried calling him several times, but he never answered or returned her messages. She tries the doorknob, and to her surprise, the front door swings open. She steps inside and the room is dark. She's also immediately hit by a strong aroma of pine? She searches on the wall and finds the switch. She turns on the lights. and can't believe what she sees standing in front of her. There, in the middle of the room, is a massive spruce tree, its upper branches pressing against the ceiling. She reaches out and touches the tree's vivid red branches. They feel sticky and wet. She pulls her hand away and looks down to see that it's covered in a red substance. That's when she notices something else. Stuck among the trunk at the base of the tree is the half-consumed body of her friend. Unfortunately, this pair would never have the opportunity to see their feelings take root and grow, because unbeknownst to them, this beautiful tree is actually a very deadly anomaly, known to the SCP Foundation as SCP-867, but which is perhaps better known by its very appropriate nickname, Blood Spruce. SCP-867 is, or at least appears to be, quite similar to the species of tree Pisceae pungens, better known as the blue spruce. Of course, there are a number of dramatic differences between 867 and its non-anomalous counterpart. Visually, and most obvious, is the coloration. While blue spruces, as the name implies, are typically a blue-green color, SCP-867 is a deep, vibrant red. There's another major visual difference too, with the blood spruce lacking any sort of seed cones that you would normally expect to find. With no pine cones to protect and spread seeds, you'd be right to ask how SCP-867 goes about reproducing. The answer to that question is what makes this beautiful tree such a dangerous anomaly. The secret to how SCP-867 reproduces is found in its leaves. While they look like pine needles, SCP-867's leaves are, in fact, needles. Their structure is very similar to that of hypodermic needles, and each one contains a single long, thin seed, which sits above a small gas pocket at the base. When a living creature touches the leaves, the tree immediately reacts. It triggers the gas pocket in the base of the leaf to release, which injects the seed into the skin of whatever touched it. The process is quite similar to that found in auto-injectors, like those used to quickly treat allergic reactions. The seed itself is extremely small and is coated in a liquid that has both anesthetic and coagulant properties, which makes the process virtually undetectable. Once implanted in the skin, these seeds can lay dormant for up to 2 weeks before they begin the germination process, and the true horror of SCP-867 is revealed. Once the seeds begin to sprout and grow, they will not seek to penetrate through the skin like a plant rising out of the soil. Instead, the strange plant will grow within its host's body, spreading throughout the circulatory system. This process is extremely painful for the host. The plant's tendrils wind through their veins and capillary system, stretching and pressing against them as the blood spruce grows within them. Eventually, the ever-increasing size of the plant's tendrils becomes too much, and the veins will begin to rupture. This leads to severe internal bleeding, and soon after, the death of the host. The entire process is quite quick, with it only taking 24 hours from when the seeds first sprout to the host dying. But that single day will feel like an eternity to the afflicted individual as they feel the plant rapidly growing inside of their body. But even though the host has expired, this parasitoid tree is far from finished with them, or at least their body. Soon after death, a new instance of the blood spruce will burst from the body. The red tree is quite small at first, but it will continue to quickly grow, just as it did within its host's body, and can reach maturity in just 30 days. And unlike most other plants, SCP-867 is able to grow regardless of light or soil conditions, because it does not produce food via photosynthesis. No, this plant is carnivorous. As it grows, the 867 will slowly consume its host's body until nothing remains except the blood-red tree. Instances of SCP-867 were first identified in Colorado during the 1990s, following reports of numerous disappearances of hikers and park rangers. The SCP Foundation dispatched a team to the area to investigate, and they soon discovered numerous instances of the previously unidentified tree. Several still young specimens were acquired, though unfortunately, this led to the deaths of several agents who were not yet aware of just how dangerous the red spruces could be. Once their threat level was properly assessed, several specimens were flagged for containment and research purposes, while all of the other identified instances still in the wild were destroyed. The remaining instances of SCP-867 were classified as Euclid and are now securely kept at a Foundation biocontainment site. Direct human contact with the plants is normally not allowed, and remote rovers are used for the majority of tests and upkeep. If for any reason it is necessary for a human to enter 867's containment cell, they are to wear full hazmat suits with a Kevlar underlayer, and upon exiting the cell, must undergo a full herbicidal treatment and inspection. Should any possible puncture marks be discovered, they will be forced to quarantine for no less than 15 days. Ah, nature. It's so beautiful, peaceful, and calming, yet seems determined to try and kill us in any number of ways. If you're out hiking or camping in the woods, try to remember this extremely famous adage which I may or may not have just made up. It goes, leaves of 3, let them be. Needles of red, well, you're probably already dead. Watch this, the teenage boy says before jumping his skateboard up onto the stair railing. His friends watch in amazement as he deftly guides his board down the long rail. They hoot and holler in support until suddenly, the boy seems to lose his balance. He falls from the rail and tumbles down the stairs of the large parking garage where they had been practicing their skateboarding tricks. The boy hits the ground at the end of the stairs, and all of his friends go quiet. The boy is stunned, but eventually he opens his eyes and stands up, but none of his friends can do anything except stare. "Oh no, oh no, oh no," the boy says as he looks down at his arm, which is now bent at a 90-degree angle in a spot where no joint should exist. The children watching all begin to scream, and one, unsure of what else to do, turns and runs. "What do I do? What do I do?" the boy with the broken arm says to no one and everyone. Luckily, one of the group quickly collects herself and steps forward to take control of the situation. "Come on," she says, "we're getting you to the hospital." The girl puts her arm around him on his non-damaged side and helps him to the street, where they have a stroke of good luck. Parked just a block away is an ambulance. "Hey!" the girl cries out, waving towards the ambulance. The paramedics inside must have seen her, because the ambulance's lights immediately come on and it drives the short distance to them. The ambulance stops and 2 paramedics quickly exit the vehicle. The paramedics don't even need to ask what happened. They can obviously see from the unnatural angle of the boy's arm that he needs immediate medical attention, and they quickly place him into the back of the ambulance. The girl begins to pull herself into the back as well, but is quite forcefully shoved back into the street. "Patients only," is the sole response from the paramedic who pushed her before he slams the door shut. The girl gets a brief look at her friend's frightened face through the back window as the ambulance speeds away. Several days later, the children are sitting outside of the same parking structure, but none of them are in any mood to skate. All they can think about is their missing friend. Neither the boy's parents nor the police have any idea what happened to him or where he went. There's no records at any of the local hospitals of him ever being brought there, nor does there seem to be any evidence of this particular ambulance having existed at all. No one even seems to believe the children that he got into an ambulance. The whole story just seems too far-fetched and outlandish, but the children know what they saw. As they discuss the events for the 100th or perhaps 1000th time, one of the smallest of the group suddenly stands up and points. "There it is!" The rest of the group looks in the direction he's motioning and sees the same thing. It's the ambulance. None of them know what to do as the vehicle flies past them, this time with no lights on, and comes to a stop a block away from where they first spotted it. They watch as the 2 paramedics exit the vehicle and go around to the back. It's hard to see from this distance, but it looks as though they took something out of the rear of the ambulance, something that requires both of them to lift before dropping it on the sidewalk behind some trash cans. The children watch as the paramedics get back into the ambulance and drive away, disappearing just as quickly as they appeared. After a moment of shock, they all in unison begin running to the place where the ambulance stopped. They come to a skidding halt just in front of the trash cans. None of them can do anything except stare until they all break out into screams, one of the children turning and immediately running away. And they have good reason to scream, because in front of them is their friend. His arm is no longer broken, appearing to have been somehow repaired in just a matter of days, but it is also no longer attached to his shoulder. The boy opens his eyes as his friends scream, and looks down to see that his arms and legs have been reattached at a new angle, jutting out from his back, leaving him standing on all fours, his face staring up at the sky like some kind of twisted animal. What happened to this young man was tragic, but he wasn't the first victim of this strange, malicious anomaly, and unfortunately, neither would he be the last, because this was SCP-4419, also known as the Butcher's Chariot. SCP-4419 appears to be a seemingly normal vehicle which resembles a standard ambulance, though the exact make and model varies between manifestations. This anomalous ambulance will appear spontaneously in locations where a medical emergency of some kind is about to take place. Just how SCP-4419 is able to predict where and when these events will take place is unknown, nor is it understood how it always takes the form of an ambulance that resembles one appropriate to the local area. Once the medical event has occurred, Whether that be a minor injury like a sprain or something more serious, such as a gunshot wound, SCP-4419 will quickly approach the injured individual. Two individuals which have a humanoid appearance and are dressed in paramedic uniforms that are, just like the ambulance, always appropriate to the location, will exit the ambulance. They will then secure the victim, using a stretcher if need be, and place them in the back of the ambulance. While the individuals who emerge from SCP-4419 will, for the most part, act as though they are normal medical professionals, they will strongly resist any attempt to either impede them in their quest to secure the injured person, as well as prevent anyone else except for their target from getting into the back of the SCP-4419 ambulance, up to and including the use of extreme physical force. As soon as the paramedic-appearing individuals have managed to secure the victim in the back of the ambulance, it will then quickly leave the area at a high rate of speed, and research has shown that as soon as it is out of observation, SCP-4419 will demanifest, along with whoever is inside. But this isn't the end of what this anomaly has in store for its victim. Between 2 and 7 days later, the SCP-4419 ambulance will suddenly reappear at the same area where it picked up its victim. The same individuals will exit the ambulance and leave the victim somewhere nearby before getting back in the vehicle and leaving the scene once again. The victim who is left behind will always have suffered what can only be described as invasive bodily modifications. Their injuries are so extreme that in most cases they should have resulted in the death of the victim, and yet they will always somehow still be alive. While the exact form of modification will vary from victim to victim, there does appear to be some correlation between the original medical emergency and the resulting procedure. And the SCP Foundation has documented a number of encounters with SCP-4419 stretching all the way back to the early 1980s. Some notable examples include one from 1983, in which a pedestrian who was crossing the street was struck by an automobile, resulting in them breaking their leg. SCP-4419 was on site and quickly helped the man into the back of the ambulance. When he was returned several days later, all of his limbs had been reattached in such a way that they were protruding from the front of his torso. In another event which occurred in 1994, a man suffered a broken jaw in a fight outside of a bar. To no surprise, SCP-4419 was on hand and took the man away for treatment. When he was next seen, his jaw had been permanently forced open, and a glass window had been installed in the back of his throat, which permitted direct viewing of his heart, which had also been moved to the back of the throat. Unfortunately, there was no way to reverse this procedure, and the man had to be euthanized. In 2003, a husband and wife were in a car accident where they each sustained multiple broken bones. When SCP-4419 dropped them back off, the two had been fused together at the back, and any bones that were broken in the crash had been removed completely. When an elderly gentleman had a heart attack in 2006, he was picked up by SCP-4419 and returned with 11 new, non-functioning hearts grafted inside of his body. Attempts were made to remove these additional hearts through surgery, but unfortunately, the man did not survive the procedure. In 2008, a structure fire resulted in 19 people suffering extreme burns. 7 more injuries came when a crowd attempted to stop the SCP-4419 paramedics from placing all of the victims in the back of the ambulance, but they were unsuccessful in preventing them from leaving the scene with them. When the group of victims was finally returned, it was as a single organism, a large solitary mass which twitches and shivers when physical contact is applied. No method for euthanizing this organism has been able to be found, and currently they are stored inside of a tank at Site-31. In perhaps the strangest sighting of SCP-4419, a U.S. private was wounded while on patrol in Afghanistan, and a military medical evacuation vehicle arrived to evacuate him. Suspicious about the vehicle's sudden appearance and the forceful conduct of the medical staff, the private's fellow soldiers ended up opening fire on the vehicle. They reported seeing a viscous black fluid leaking from the vehicle's surface, but they were unable to stop it from taking the injured private. In a deviation from its normal behavior, the victim was not returned to the same place, and instead appeared in the barracks the next day. The victim had been broken down into a thin paste and was spread across the walls. Agents were dispatched to secure what was left of the man, and they reported finding a still intact eyeball that dilated when they approached. The collected viscera has been labeled as remains and placed in storage, but it is currently unknown whether or not the victim has truly expired. Due to the danger SCP-4419 presents to anyone who suffers an injury, as well as its ability to appear virtually anywhere on the planet, it has been classified as Keter. Containment efforts at this point are largely focused on maintaining information control and post-manifestation cleanup, as opposed to any attempts at physical confinement. Anyone who witnesses an SCP-4419 manifestation is to be administered amnestics, and victims are to be treated in order to restore them to their original physical state as much as possible, or euthanized when no viable medical treatments are available, with a cover story constructed in order to explain their death. SCP-4419 is one of the most cruel and sadistic anomalies in the SCP Foundation's database, ranking right up there with SCP-106, the Old Man. Hopefully one day we will find a means to contain this brutal so-called medical vehicle, but until then, be careful if you suffer an injury and an ambulance is suddenly on hand. You might come back changed in ways you never thought possible.
It's 1 o'clock in the morning on a work night, and the last of the bar hoppers and clubgoers have long since turned in. At the end of the street, the last bar is finally closing down for the night. Or it would, except that the bartender is having trouble getting rid of a customer. Sitting at the bar, an old derelict is demanding yet another drink. The bartender grumbles in annoyance. This derelict is sloppy drunk, and the bartender just wants to go home. "Closing time," growls the bartender. "Just one more," protests the derelict, shaking his empty glass for emphasis. "I've got money." He laughs at his own words, his giggles ending with a loud belch that blows a cloud of aromatic vapor into the bartender's face. That's it. This derelict has been hanging out at this bar causing trouble all night, and the bartender has had enough. "Get out of here," says the bartender as he hustles the wobbling derelict out the door. "You're done." The derelict creaks and totters as he stumbles out into the street. The night's festivities are really hitting him. It isn't so often that he's got the money to burn, but when he does, he likes to spend it here. The prices are right, and the conversation is minimal, which is just the way that he likes it. The derelict turns around, fire in his eyes. He's raring to fight, and he doesn't care that the bartender is quite a bit larger than he is. Right now, all he can see is red. "Don't tell me when I've had enough," he slurs, raising his fists as he prepares to lash out. But the bartender has already slammed the door in his face. Defeated, the derelict turns his back on the closed bar and starts a slow stumble down the street. "Stupid bartender," mutters the derelict, turning up his collar against the cold bite of the night air. He wishes that he just had one more drink to warm his stomach against the chill. He's so out of it that he doesn't stop to think that the bartender did him a favor by refusing to fight. There is no way that the derelict would have won that battle. Even if he was in his physical prime, even if the bartender wasn't twice his size, the derelict is in no shape to fight. His vision is blurry and his head is swimming. In fact, he can barely remain upright. If he had any sense, he would probably stumble home and sleep this off. But the night is young, and he's not ready to give up yet. He walks down the street, eyeing every storefront in hopes of finding another bar. Unfortunately, every window has a closed sign in it. He swears under his breath. What a run of bad luck. What's a guy supposed to do in this town, he wonders. Just when he's about to give up hope, he spies something glinting in the reflective halo of a street lamp. He stumbles closer to get a better look, and he can hardly believe his eyes. Finally, his luck is changing. Someone has abandoned a half-empty bottle. "Well, hello there, little friend," says the derelict. He struggles to focus, but the world is spinning. In his confusion, he could swear he's seeing things. But no, he can feel the heft of the glass bottle in his hand, and he knows that it is as real as he is. "Who left you behind? Who would leave a perfectly good bottle just sitting out here?" He recognizes this brand. There's only about 3 fingers of liquid left, but that's better than nothing. Some people might balk at drinking out of a random bottle that you found on the street, but the derelict doesn't give it a second thought. He tips the bottle back and slurps it all down. It burns going down, just as it should, he thinks. He sighs in contentment as he feels the harsh liquid warm his stomach. Perfect. That really hit the spot. But what happens next surprises him so much that he can't believe his eyes. There's still liquid in the bottle. He blinks, wondering if maybe his adult brain is playing tricks on him, but he shakes the bottle cautiously and is rewarded with the telltale swish of liquid. That's no illusion. He takes another swig, guzzling it down. Normally, he'd drop the bottle to the ground and stumble on, but something makes him pause. He maintains his grip on the bottleneck and raises it again to take another look. And sure enough, there's still more left in the bottle. The derelict cannot believe his luck. He feels like he must have won the lottery. He's found a never-ending bottle. Already his mind is reeling with possibilities. "That bartender really thinks he's so smart," he mutters to himself as he weaves unsteadily. "But I don't need him anymore. See if I ever go to this stupid bar again. He just lost his best customer. Now that I have you, little bottle, I don't ever need to pay for drinks ever again. It's the best day of my life."
crows the derelict, raising his arms in triumph. He's barely able to stagger back to his home, a seedy apartment on the bad side of town, before he passes out on the floor. The morning sun rouses the slumbering derelict, and he rises with a groan. His whole body aches, and his mouth feels dry and parched. That's par for the course after a night of drinking, but somehow this hangover feels different. He puts that thought out of his mind as his mind returns to the strange, never-empty bottle that he discovered the night before. It's lying on its side on the floor next to him. He reaches for the mysterious bottle, only to find that, in fact, the previous night was not a dream. The bottle still contains just as much as it did the night before. He can't explain it, but the derelict isn't about to question his good fortune. He lifts himself to his feet and walks slowly into the bathroom. He's feeling a hangover like he's never felt before. His head is pounding and his throat is dry. His tongue feels swollen and sluggish inside his mouth, but he knows how to handle it. A little hair of the dog is all you need to help with the hangover. He takes another gulp from his bottle, but this time it brings little relief. And he notices something else strange too. It's his scalp. The skin on his head has started to itch, and he can't stop scratching. He feels like he's got the world's worst dandruff problem. He should probably take a shower, he thinks. He strips down and steps into the tub, turning the hot water on full blast and letting it wash over him. The shower only brings him temporary relief. Afterward, as he dries himself off, the towels feel rough and abrasive against his skin. His skin comes off in big, flaky patches, and his nails leave red trails in their wake. What's that? Is that blood? He examines his fingers to see that his nails have grown into ragged, claw-like talons. With a frightened yelp, he bites them off. It's easy to do. Although they look formidable, his fingernails are weak and brittle, almost as if he's dealing with a sudden calcium deficiency. What could be wrong with him? He remembers all the warnings he heard back in school when they used to march everyone into assembly to listen to lectures from the local police. At the time, he scoffed at the long lists of scary-sounding consequences of a lifetime of drinking, but now, he's not so sure. "It's probably nothing," he says as he examines himself in the bathroom mirror. His skin looks blotchy and infected. It doesn't take long before his hair and nails are out of control. His hair grows down to his shoulders, but comes out in big, ragged clumps if he runs his fingers through it. His claw-like fingernails are constantly breaking and cracking until his fingertips are bloody, and his quick is itchy and infected. If his habits had left him looking worse for wear before, he really looks awful now. For the next week, he barely leaves the apartment. He pulls the curtains and keeps the lights off, afraid that someone might see him. When the landlord bangs on the door, shouting that rent is late and demanding that the derelict hand over the money, he doesn't answer. He waits. The landlord gives up for now. That's good, thinks the derelict. It will give him time to think, time to figure out what to do about his disease. He knows that something is not right. Many of the local bartenders are, by now, probably wondering where he's gone. It's not like the derelict to stay away. He's practically kept the bar industry in this town afloat all by himself. It must be something major indeed to keep him away from his favorite poison. Luckily, he still has the bottomless bottle to comfort him during this trying time. The derelict is certain that he's caught some bad bug, but he thinks that he can wait it out. All he needs to do is make it through the next week, and everything will be fine. Sipping free drinks helps him to pass the time in a pleasant stupor as he waits for his health to return. Unfortunately, things are only going to get worse for him. His hair and fingernails keep growing, to the point that he has trouble lifting the bottle without his twisted nails getting in the way. His dry, flaky skin is changing as well, becoming thick and leathery and hanging off him in great folds like the hide of an elephant or a rhinoceros. His skin continues to grow, until the folds flop over his knees and gradually hang lower and lower until they touch the ground. Moving is harder now that he's carrying so much extra weight. He thought at first he just had a nasty bug, but he's clearly picked up some weird skin condition, and even this derelict, sodded as he might be, suspects exactly where he got it. It's got to be that crazy bottomless bottle. He can't think of another reason. Even so, he can't bring himself to part with this little gift from heaven. Even in his darkest hour, a few sips of liquid courage always helps to calm his nerves. He considers lumbering down to the free clinic in hopes that they might be able to cure him or at least tell him what's wrong with his skin. But he thinks better of this option. What if he's got some weird alien parasite that no one has ever seen before? They might lock him away in some government lab or something. No, he reasons, it's better to wait it out. He'll sleep it off, swear off the sauce for a little while, and maybe it'll pass. In desperation, the derelict drags himself across the floor, hoping to at least find some solace away from human contact. He locks himself into his bedroom while he's still able to manipulate the lock on his door. The extra folds of skin are hanging off of his hands and arms, making it hard to do anything. The extra skin is so heavy that he can't walk much carrying all that extra weight. He lies on the floor of his bedroom, away from everything, and hopes that tomorrow, when he wakes up, this will just be a fading dream. The only thing that brings him solace is the never-ending bottle, which, even now in his advanced state of decay, he keeps close by him. After all, he reasons, the damage is already done. What could possibly be the harm in enjoying a nice drink? A week later, his condition has not passed. The landlord is back, and this time he's not taking no for an answer. The landlord isn't supposed to enter his tenant's apartment without permission, but he doesn't care. He uses his own key to unlock the door and go inside. The condition of the apartment is appalling. The furniture is broken, the floor is covered with unidentifiable filth, and there's a rotten stench in the air. The landlord wants to throw up as the full weight of the musty smell hits him in the face. It's as if someone has been living in here without any ventilation, with all the windows firmly closed and sealed. A sudden noise from the bathroom draws his attention. Of course, thinks the landlord, that old bum is hiding in there. He thinks I won't find him. The landlord steels his resolve and heads towards the bathroom, determined to get the money that he feels is owed to him. But what greets him when he steps through the door isn't the derelict anymore. It isn't even human. The creature in the bathroom is a massive pile of ambulatory skin folds. The skin flaps have grown so large and cumbersome that the derelict within can barely move. They sprout all over his body, covering him so that he looks more like some kind of alien sea cucumber now than any human. The landlord stumbles backwards, screaming in terror at the sight, unable to comprehend what he's looking at. Improbably, the creature reacts to the noise, and a ripple of movement spreads across its surface. It starts to move, despite not having any legs. The landlord is so terrified that he doesn't notice the glass bottle that suddenly drops from between the creature's skin folds as it starts to move toward him. The same bottle, still with 3 fingers of liquid inside. How could something like this happen? What parasite or disease did the derelict contract from the miracle bottle he found? Sadly, this never-ending bottle isn't a boon, but a curse, and the man who found it that night became just another victim of what the SCP Foundation has classified as SCP-420. SCP-420 looks like a perfectly ordinary bottle of a certain popular libation, even to the point that it bears the label of a common brand. The bottle always contains a small amount of a mysterious liquid known as SCP-420-1. If this liquid is poured out, SCP-420 will always replenish itself. When SCP-420-1 is potent, it is physically, chemically, and molecularly indistinguishable from ordinary whiskey, although drinking will have an effect far greater than even the strongest liquor. When SCP-420-1 is poured out of SCP-420, though, it undergoes a strange transformation, eventually losing its potency and changing until it is indistinguishable physically, chemically, or molecularly from urine. Consuming potent SCP-420-1 instigates a bizarre physical transformation called SCP-420-2 in 6 stages. In Stage 1, beginning 12 hours after consumption, the subject will start to have difficulty speaking, resulting in slurred speech that is not consistent with normal alcohol inebriation. Their fingernails, toenails, and hair will start to grow at an accelerated rate, but also become brittle and prone to breakage. Nail breakage to the quick often leads to bleeding and infection. The Foundation has had some success in curing SCP-420-2 if it is caught when still in Stage 1, treating it as if it is an aggressive form of cancer with radiation and chemotherapy, as well as a constant intravenous supply of Formula 420A09T-T174B. Victims thus treated have a 73% recovery rate, but a 21% fatality rate. From Phase 2 onward, this protocol can slow the spread of SCP-420-2, but will not stop it entirely. In Stage 2, beginning 1 to 2 weeks after Stage 1, the subject's skin begins to show similar properties to those exhibited by hair and fingernails in Stage 1, becoming dry, brittle, and prone to cracking. As old skin flakes off, the subject's new skin begins to grow at an accelerated rate, eventually forming thick, leathery folds all over the subject's body. Skin flaps growing inside the mouth interfere with speech and eventually render subjects mute, but do not appear to impede breathing or eating. Indeed, subjects in Stage 2 exhibit a renewed interest in eating, possibly because the subject's body requires additional nutrients and calories to build the increasingly heavy armor of thickened, calloused skin. Stage 2 subjects will eat anything that they can get their hands on, and many die after attempting to eat poisonous or inedible objects. In Stage 3, beginning 3 to 6 weeks after Stage 2, nerves in the skin layer grow uncontrollably, but no longer connect to the victim's central nervous system. Genetic testing of the skin in this stage reveals that its DNA has become so mutated that it can no longer be classified as human. It is, in fact, a separate and very inhuman organism that almost acts as a parasite growing from the human host. The skin may develop tumor-like growths, which appear to be analogous to human muscle and secretory cells. Hair and fingernails sprout randomly from the mass of skin. By stage 4, beginning 3 to 7 days after stage 3, the skin has become a mass of thick, leathery folds, completely covering the human host to the point that they disappear completely. The skin begins to exhibit random twitching movements, as though it is indeed a living organism finally coming into its own as a life form and testing out its new body. The human subject within the skin continues to eat, although brain scans reveal that they are no longer in control of their mouth. Instead, the skin entity forces the mouth to move by moving the attached skin. Small holes begin to form in the skin, eventually growing into narrow tunnels or throats that lead back to the now trapped body of the helpless subject. The subject is still consumed with a ravenous hunger and will eat anything that they can get in their mouth. In stage 5, beginning 1 to 2 days after stage 4, the skin begins to move in patterns indicating rudimentary intelligence. The skin, although still attached to the original subject, is now completely and distinctly non-human. It is its own organism. It can move of its own accord, dragging the trapped host along for the ride, and it moves and feeds much in the manner of an extremely large amoeba. It feeds by excreting a digestive enzyme onto foodstuffs and then enveloping the nutrients with its skin folds, again like an amoeba surrounding its food. The food is taken into the throats. These tunnels connecting the outside of the skin to the now completely subsumed host are now directly connected to the host's circulatory system and function as additional mouths. They can consume nutrients which are moved down their length by bristly hairs and further broken down by grinding keratinous plates before being taken into the host's body. Most hosts will remain in stage 5 indefinitely, although there still remains a much more dangerous stage 6 yet to come. At this time, it's unknown what factor triggers SCP-420-2 to develop into stage 6. Little information about stage 6 is available at this time, although it is known that it involves even more accelerated skin and keratin growth, resulting in a sudden increase in size and mass. Perhaps the most terrifying part of the entire transformation is that the host remains alive for the duration of the process, and sometimes even after SCP-420-2 has settled comfortably into its new life at stage 5. Mercifully, most hosts will have completely succumbed to insanity by this point, although some are shown by brain scans to still be self-aware and quite calm, perhaps fading into a Zen-like state as they accept the inevitability of their fate. SCP-420 is contained in a storage locker at an undisclosed site maintained by the Foundation, and it is only to be removed from this locker by SCP staff with Level 3 clearance or higher. It has been given the Safe class because, despite the horrifying nature of its effects, at least it doesn't move anywhere. Samples of SCP-420-1 not in use by testing should be stored in the container marked SCP-420-1 Decon in Locker 1014-420 until they lose potency, at which time they can be disposed of as biohazardous liquid waste. Victims infected with SCP-420-2 are not contagious and should be contained in standard solitary D-class secure confinement. On reaching Phase 3, subjects should receive double rations. Due to the extreme danger of Phase 6, any subjects who reach Phase 4 should be closely monitored for signs that the condition may be advancing further, in which case they are to be immediately destroyed by incineration. Knowing the fate that befalls victims of SCP-420 should make anyone think twice about drinking out of a random bottle that you just found in the street, though personally, I think that's just common sense. I hope you enjoyed this anomaly, which was recommended by DrBob Squad researcher Lawman23.
As you can clearly see, this completely throws our entire understanding of our place in the universe into complete disarray, says the astronomer as he excitedly makes his case to a panel of aged and supposedly learned advisors. My observations leave no doubt that everything we previously suspected to be the absolute truth is wrong. The panel of advisors murmur and lean close together to whisper to each other. The astronomer can't hear what they are saying, but the passion and joy that he felt as he explained his findings to the room is quickly draining from his face. He can see the men mouthing the words "no" and "lies" as they make disapproving gestures. But how could this be? Had they not understood what he was showing them? Maybe he didn't explain things in a way that they could comprehend. Here he was, the greatest scientist of his day, presenting hard facts, backed up by rigorous observations, and this was their reaction.
The group of advisors finish conferring and grow quiet. The chief advisor clears his throat, and everyone in the room waits for him to speak. Royal Scientist, this panel has examined your findings and listened to your theories. The advisor can't help but sneer at the word, and has decided that the ideas you present are not only incorrect, but dangerous. The astronomer can't believe what he's hearing. This panel, acting under the authority of the king, has charged you with the crime of heresy. The astronomer is shocked. He steps towards the panel to plead with them, but he's stopped by a pair of guards who grab him by the arms. Stop! Stop! I'm a man of science. I only presented you with the truth. But no one seems moved by his appeals. The panel watches as the astronomer is dragged from the room, kicking and fighting, still insisting on his innocence. The screams echo through the dungeon as the torturer cranks another notch on the rack, stretching the astronomer's body just a little bit more. He has no idea how long this has been going on. Hours, days. The pain has been excruciating and without end. He closes his eyes, trying to escape the torture by retreating into his mind, but he's slapped on the face and brought back to the reality of his situation. Standing in front of him is the chief advisor, the same one who sentenced him to this inhumane treatment. You can end this any time you like. Simply recant your statements and admit you were mistaken, and all of this will be over. The astronomer is unsure if by over he means that they will release him or simply kill him to put him out of his misery. But it didn't matter which the right answer was. He couldn't lie. The astronomer knew the truth, and no amount of pain, no matter how intense or how long they submitted him to it, would change what he now knew. Disappointed with the astronomer's steadfastness, the advisor signals to the torturer, who cranks the rack again, stretching the astronomer's body to the point where he feels like his bones might pop out of their sockets. Recant, the advisor screams, repeating the word over and over, growing louder as the astronomer's own cries increase from the pain caused by the torturer cranking the rack more and more. The astronomer closes his eyes again. He's certain this will be the end of him soon, and that he will die with the great secret he's learned without getting the chance to share it with the world. But suddenly, the astronomer notices that the room has gone quiet. The advisor is no longer yelling, and the torturer has stopped operating the machine. The astronomer opens his eyes to see the advisor and the torturer both in a deep bow. His gaze continues up and he sees the king himself standing in front of him. The king stares at the astronomer for what feels like an eternity before simply asking, "Is it true?" The astronomer, limbs still stretched on the rack, manages a nod, and with his remaining strength whispers, "It's true." The king motions with his hand to the torturer, who stands up and begins releasing the astronomer from his constraints. The advisor protests, "But my lord, this man—" But he's cut off by the king with a stern look and retreats back into his deep bow. "Show me," the king says as the astronomer stands, rubbing his sore shoulders where the tendons and muscles were stretched far beyond their natural limits. The astronomer opens the door to his laboratory and gestures for the king to enter. The room is a mess of papers and scientific equipment, a reflection of the busy and scattered mind of the man who works here. The king is immediately drawn to a table with a large scroll. He spreads it across the table and examines it, but his face betrays no hint of what he is thinking. "Is this what you showed my advisors?" The astronomer nods yes. "Would you like to see for yourself?" The astronomer motions to the window, where a brass tube is attached to a tripod. The king approaches the device, but doesn't know how it works. The astronomer demonstrates by looking through the eyepiece. He moves it slightly, making small adjustments to make sure it is just right for the king. "There, now look." The king bends over to peer through the telescope, and a look of shock comes over his face. What he sees is the most incredible thing he has ever witnessed. There, far above up in the sky, unable to be seen by the naked eye, is a man, and he is staring back at him. The planet that this played out on was not Earth, but a bizarre place that is one of the strangest anomalies in the entire SCP Foundation archive. This is SCP-007, also known as Abdominal Planet. SCP-007 is a spherical object located in the abdomen of a young man, or rather in the space where his abdomen should be, since most of the muscle, skin, and organs that should be present simply are not. The subject, a Caucasian male in his mid-20s of average height and build, does not appear affected by the large missing portion of his body, and has not reported experiencing pain or discomfort of any kind. In the space where his abdominal muscles and organs should be is a small globe composed of soil and water. This sphere, which measures roughly 60 centimeters in diameter, resembles the planet Earth, though the arrangement of the continents does not match any known configuration from our own planet's history. The tiny planet has its own weather patterns and even a small, but still detectable, gravitational pull. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of SCP-007 is that it appears to be inhabited. Microscopic organisms that would correspond to roughly the scale of human beings on Earth have been observed on the surface of the planet. So far, 2 distinct intelligent species have been identified, both of whom seem to possess a technological level similar to the 15th century on Earth. It is unknown if the inhabitants of the Abdominal planet are aware of the world outside of their planet, and communication attempts with the planet's occupants have been placed on hold by senior Foundation officials, pending further study into what effect an exchange may have on them or us. The human subject within which SCP-007 is located provided the Foundation with a name that he claims to be his, but no records of such a person existing have yet to be located. Upon being questioned about the lack of records, he willfully offered both a social security and driver's license number, but when they were checked against current records, neither had yet to be assigned by the US government. And the mysteries surrounding this man don't stop there. The subject has not shown the need for either food or water, and it is unknown what energy source his body continues to operate on without nutrition. He is capable of both eating and drinking, though, despite the large missing section of his stomach, but it is still not known what happens to the substances after he swallows them. The man has above-average intelligence and scored a 128 on an administered IQ test. He also generally appears friendly and amiable, and expresses only a passing curiosity about the planet located within his abdomen and how it came to be there. When asked about the origins of the planet, he replied very matter-of-factly that, "I just woke up one day and there it was. I don't have any idea how it got there." Due to the poorly understood nature of SCP-007, it has been classified as Euclid, and the small planet and the man it resides in are contained in a sealed, comfortably furnished 10 by 10 meter room that the subject is not allowed to leave. The subject is to be monitored closely by Foundation staff and has a weekly chess game with one of the attending doctors, which also serves as an opportunity to evaluate his mental health. So far, he has not shown any signs of mental illness or violent tendencies, and seems to be quite content. In general, he appears happy with his restricted living situation inside the Foundation facility and has made no attempts to escape. The subject has made multiple requests for access to a computer with an internet connection, but due to potential security risks, this request has thus far been denied.
A doctor frantically writes in his journal, "It's almost impossible to believe everything that's transpired has taken place in such a short amount of time. It all began 3 days ago. It was just another day down in the mines. A worker was drilling into a seam of coal when suddenly there was an issue with the rig. From what I've gathered, it sounds like the drill bit exploded due to some kind of mechanical defect, sending shards of metal flying throughout the tunnel. The worker was lucky that none of the large pieces struck him, as they surely would have been fatal. He had, though, still been grazed by a piece of shrapnel from the ruined drill bit, and it had left a deep cut across his upper arm. Other miners who were working nearby heard the commotion and quickly came to his aid. They applied a tourniquet to stem the flow of blood and helped him to the mine shaft elevator for the long ride to the surface. Once they reached the safety of daylight, they brought the injured man to the on-site medical clinic, where I was on duty at the time. I cleaned the wound since there was a substantial amount of coal dust that had gotten inside, before suturing and bandaging it. The miner was sent to his bunkhouse to recover, and I thought that would be the end of it. Of course, it was only the beginning. Roughly 24 hours later, the same miner presented himself to me once again. I asked about his injury, and he explained that while his arm was fine, he now felt like he might be coming down with an illness. His symptoms included a runny nose, a cough, and body aches, so my assumption was that he'd simply had some bad luck and caught a cold that just so happened to coincide with being injured on the job. I sent him to his bunk once again, telling him that he wouldn't be able to work and should instead use the day to rest and recover. The next day, I was once again in the clinic when my phone rang. It wasn't the sick miner, but instead his supervisor. The miner hadn't shown up for his shift that morning, and he asked for me to go check on him since he knew he hadn't been feeling well. I agreed that it was strange that neither of us had heard anything else from the miner and went to see him straight away. I entered the bunkhouse where many of the workers stay while on site at this remote mine. It was empty, except for the injured miner who was still in his bed. As I approached, I could immediately tell something was very wrong. The man was curled up in the fetal position and was sweating profusely while also shivering. A quick touch of his forehead revealed that the man had a high fever, too. He was practically incoherent, seemingly delirious from his high temperature. The miner was moved to the empty bed inside the clinic so I could better observe and tend to him, but very carefully since I assumed now that he was actually suffering from influenza and didn't want to risk an outbreak at the mine. I was getting ready to administer fluids to the miner, who was still mumbling incomprehensibly, when I noticed something on his face. It appeared that he was crying, but the tears that ran down his cheeks weren't made of water. They were blood. I hadn't seen anything like it before. There was no reason why influenza should be causing this man to cry tears of blood. I could see the veins in his forehead starting to pulse, as if his blood pressure had suddenly skyrocketed. And just as I was leaning in to get a closer look, something horrible happened. The miner suddenly opened his mouth and expelled an enormous stream of blood. The blast of blood struck me in the face and knocked me backwards in fright as the man continued expelling more and more blood from his mouth, which soon covered the walls of the clinic. With seemingly all the blood having been discharged from his body, the man then went limp. I attempted to resuscitate him, but strangely, there was no need. The man was comatose, but he was alive. There I was, standing in the middle of the clinic over the man, both he, myself, as well as the room completely covered in blood. It was one of the worst things I'd ever experienced as a doctor, and yet, somehow, it was about to get even worse. I was still in shock from what had just happened when I heard the door to the clinic open behind me. I turned around to see a group of half a dozen more miners from the site, each one coughing, sweating, and shivering. One held a cloth to his ear that was stained red, while another attempted to stop his nose from bleeding. Whatever had infected the first patient wasn't a one-off medical event. This had the makings of an epidemic. I knew that I was in way over my head. I was just a general practitioner, not an infectious disease specialist, and I called the Center for Disease Control to get their guidance. I was told to quarantine the sick man as best I could, and that a rapid response team would be sent who were better equipped to deal with potential outbreaks. While I waited for the CDC to arrive, I began moving the afflicted men to a bunkhouse that had been designated for quarantining. Several more also began expelling huge amounts of blood, though unlike the first patient, none of the others survived the traumatic event. As I was putting the final infected man into a bed, I noticed something, though. There was a huge amount of heat radiating off of his lower body, and when I pulled down the blankets, I discovered something that even with all of the strange happenings, I still couldn't believe. There were huge lumps growing on his legs, each of which looked to be filled with some kind of fluid or gas, and they were extremely hot to the touch, as if the chemicals inside the lumps were creating a source of heat. As I was investigating the bizarre growths, I suddenly looked up to see that the man was no longer in a state of delirium. Instead, a crazed look had come over his eyes, and he suddenly leapt out of bed, flailing and clawing at me as if he wanted to kill me. I don't know how, but I was able to fight off the man and run out of the bunkhouse. He gave chase, though, and with no other option, I ran into a nearby storage shed. The man was beating and scratching at the door, but I was able to barricade it by dragging a heavy shelf in front of it. After several minutes of trying to break inside, he finally gave up and left. And here I remain. I'm too afraid to go back out. It seems that if the disease won't kill me, then whatever it is turning people into will. All I can do is wait for the CDC team to get here and hopefully know how to deal with whatever this situation has become. The doctor closes his small notebook and notices a drop of something fall onto the cover. He reaches up and wipes his hand across his mouth. It comes back, covered in blood. The doctor didn't know what the disease was that had so rapidly spread through the workers at the mine, nor did the CDC response team when they arrived. No, it wasn't until the SCP Foundation caught word of the mysterious outbreak that someone would finally determine what was happening with what would soon be called SCP-016, which is also known as the Sentient Micro-Organism. SCP-016 is a blood-borne pathogen that was first discovered after a worker at a remote mine was injured while drilling into a coal seam deep beneath the earth. It is theorized that coal dust entered the wound, dust which perhaps carried dormant spores of what would become SCP-016. Over the next several days, all of the remaining employees at the mine were infected, as was the CDC crisis team that was sent to the mine to investigate the outbreak of what was potentially an undiscovered pathogen. Following the CDC's inability to deal with the disease, the SCP Foundation took over the site and quickly terminated all affected personnel in order to prevent further spread. The first infected person, Patient 0, was taken into Foundation custody for further investigation, and the mine shaft itself was collapsed by an explosive device in order to seal it off. After studying Patient 0, the Foundation learned a great deal about just what they were dealing with. What they found was that SCP-016 has an incubation period that can vary wildly, from just 24 hours to as long as 2 years, with the length appearing to be dependent on the number of other potential human hosts in the immediate area. Once symptoms begin to present in an individual, they will at first look to be quite similar to the common cold. They can include coughing, a runny nose, itchy eyes, and body aches. Roughly 48 hours after the first symptoms, the infected person will experience a form of hemorrhagic fever similar to the Ebola virus, which causes a small amount of bleeding in the lungs. This leads to the infected blood becoming aspirated, most likely in order to better spread through the air. The third stage of the disease leads to the host crashing and bleeding out as they start to bleed profusely from multiple body orifices, including the nose, tear ducts, mouth, and even through the pores of their skin. Their blood pressure will also skyrocket during this final stage, and in some cases have vomited blood as far as 5 meters. Oddly enough, although most die from the traumatic event, this almost complete exsanguination will not always result in death. Sometimes, following the removal of almost all blood from the body, the patient will somehow survive, and the pathogen inside their body will return to its dormant phase once again, before eventually repeating the process. But SCP-016 is more than just a rapid and often deadly bloodborne disease, as you will soon see. As SCP researchers studied the disease, what they discovered was that it had a very strange property that sets it apart from other hemorrhagic fevers like Ebola and the Marburg virus. What they found was that when someone infected with SCP-016 is placed into a high-stress situation, such as one where their life is being threatened, SCP-016 will transition from rapidly reproducing inside of its host's body to instead begin rewriting their host's actual DNA. This genetic manipulation, combined with the stimulation of rapid cell division, leads to the host undergoing major physiological changes and in extremely small amounts of time. In just 24 hours, the host can begin showing physical changes to their body, and a complete bodily reconstruction can occur in less than 2 weeks. Most of the hosts who begin to undergo physical changes will not survive the process, due to how heavily the transformation stresses the body, but those that do will be changed in more than just physical ways. They'll exhibit hyper-aggressive behaviors, not dissimilar to those infected by rabies. And it's theorized that the pathogen may cause this behavior in order to better spread the virus. When the Foundation realized that SCP-016 was capable of these transformative effects, they immediately undertook a number of experiments on D-Class personnel in order to better understand their full extent. In the first test, a D-Class was infected with SCP-016, and as soon as they began showing symptoms, their cell was slowly flooded with water in order to stimulate the life-threatening situation needed to trigger the transformation process. Over the next 24 hours, researchers watched as the subject appeared to develop gills, which would allow it to survive in the now water-filled cell. The transformations didn't stop there, though, and over the next 2 weeks, the subject also had their limbs change into fins, their eyesight deteriorated, and their sense of hearing increased as they developed an echolocation ability very similar to the one employed by whales and dolphins. The experiment was concluded by removing all of the water from the cell, leading to the death of the subject from asphyxiation, as they could no longer breathe in the open air. A similar experiment was performed on another D-Class, but this time, instead of taking on aquatic animal properties, the D-Class experienced rapid muscle growth, and their knuckles grew bone-like protrusions. It attempted to use both of these to break through the door of their flooding cell, but they were unable to breach the reinforced steel, and soon died from drowning. The Foundation now knew that the virus could react in different ways to the same situation. The same experiment was run a third time, but in this instance, the infected D-class exhibited an entirely different means of trying to escape. The subject had a massive growth appear on its chest, which seemed to be fed from 2 different tubes of flesh, also emanating from the subject's body. Fearing what it planned to do, the Foundation ended the experiment early and terminated the subject. An autopsy revealed that the growth was actually a hollow chamber that was being fed by the tubes with oxygen and acetylene gas, which when combined in sufficient amounts would cause a massive combustion event. In other words, SCP-016 was turning the subject into a living bomb. Moving on from flooded cell tests, the researchers next left the D-class inside of a room with no stressing elements, and instead told them to focus on growing a pair of wings. Without any reason to begin the transformation process, SCP-016 went through its normal stages, and the subject died from blood loss without any other changes occurring. In the final test, a D-class was placed inside of an acrylic box that was suspended over a mine shaft, with a timer attached indicating the time when the bottom of the box would open and drop the D-class into the 1,000-foot deep shaft. This D-class was also told to focus on growing wings that would allow them to survive the plunge. The subject began to transform over the next 24 hours, but rather than grow wings, they instead developed a tentacle-like appendage on their arm that was capable of producing silk, similar to a spider's spinneret. They used the silk-producing organ to secure themselves to the box, showing that subjects did not appear to be able to control the way in which SCP-016 would alter their bodies. This experiment concluded when the timer reached 0 and the bomb attached to it detonated, as had been the plan all along. Following this last test, SCP-016 samples were placed into containment, and access to the sample for experimental purposes is only allowed with prior authorization from Level 4 or 05 personnel, with full documentation of the proposed experiment required beforehand. Failure to follow any of these procedures will lead to the offending personnel being reassigned to D-class duty or terminated. SCP-016 has been classified as Keter, and the only existing sample is kept in a petri dish which is under extreme lockdown inside of a 5x5 by 5 meter room, where the temperature is kept below 0 degrees Celsius at all times. Should an outbreak of SCP-016 occur, all infected personnel are to be immediately terminated on site, and if the infection cannot be contained within 48 hours, then the on-site nuclear device is to be detonated prior to any additional personnel being evacuated. While the containment procedures may sound callous, unfortunately, when it comes to anomalous pathogens as dangerous as SCP-016, no chances can be taken.
Ever worried that someday you might just up and disappear? There's nothing quite like a Sunday afternoon picnic in the park. The fresh air, the lazy hours sprawled out across a blanket, sharing company, food, drinks, and the beauty of the outdoors. The young man and his girlfriend spent their afternoon doing just that, enjoying a bit of slow living on a Sunday. Now, the sunset has streaked the sky with red and orange, and the air is beginning to cool to a less pleasant chill. It's time to pack up the remnants of the picnic and head on home. He carries the blanket, and she carries the basket, each of them keeping one hand free so they can still hold hands. They begin the walk back to the young man's apartment through the steadily emptying park. It's a familiar walk, one they've taken every Sunday for the past year that they've been together, and they take it at the same slow, easy pace as the picnic. There's no rush, not today. That's what Monday mornings are for. Right now, there's just the sunset, the park, and her hand in his. The young man catches a glimpse of a squirrel burying a nut in the dirt under a nearby tree. He goes to squeeze his girlfriend's hand to point out the adorable sight, but she pulls her hand out of his. She's changed course, walking toward a pair of benches, transfixed on something there. She asks in a strangely panicked voice whether he saw it. Strange, he can't spot anything out of the ordinary. The girlfriend insists with unnerving intensity that she saw some kind of strange light for a split second, something that was gone as soon as it appeared, but left an indelible impression. The young man laughs uneasily. Something's wrong. Can't quite explain what it is. The hairs on the back of his neck are standing up. He tries to change the subject back to the squirrel. He turns to point out the squirrel again, but she remains fixated on whatever she can see that he can't. He can feel a knot forming in his stomach, a sense of dread, as his body screams at him to get out of there as fast as he can. He tries to soothe his overactive nervous system, to remind himself that there's no danger here. But just before he turns back to his girlfriend to suggest they hurry home, he hears a soft thud as something lands in the grass. He turns to see the picnic basket lying on the ground, dropped there all of a sudden. His girlfriend is nowhere to be found. He calls out to her, but there's no answer. It's as if she vanished into thin air. Terrified, the young man combs the park for any trace of her, but aside from the picnic basket, there's nothing. He calls the police and files a missing persons report, but there's little they can do. There are no signs of any foul play, no reason to believe anything has happened to her. She was simply there one moment and gone the next. The young man doesn't sleep a wink that night. He calls out of work the next day, determined to continue his search. If the police can't help him, he'll just have to get to the bottom of things on his own. He calls his girlfriend's parents, but they haven't heard from her since Saturday. Her friends haven't seen her or received so much as a text. She didn't go into work either. Desperate for answers, he returns to the park, pacing back and forth in the spot where she vanished by the benches. As he does, he hears a sudden sound that makes his heart leap into his throat. Her voice, just a whisper, as if her lips are mere inches from his ear. She calls his name. She asks him what happened. He doesn't know what to say. He whirls around, searching for her face, but she isn't there. Is it just his imagination? His grief causing him to hallucinate the voice he wants to hear the most? There it is again, her whispering to him, telling him that she loves him, that she misses him, that she can't feel her body anymore. The young man's knees buckle, and he collapses onto the grass, weeping. It's as if she's right there, but just out of reach. He can hear her, but he can't see her, can't touch her. He asks her what on earth happened. I don't know. I don't know where I am. I don't know what I am. I don't. Her voice grows weaker, fading to static. She's fading away, and he can't do anything to hold on to her. His eyes settle on the tree where he saw the squirrel the day before. The bark swirls in a pattern that, when he stares at it too long and lets his eyes unfocus, looks almost like her face. He reaches out, brushing his fingers against the bark. It isn't her. Of course it isn't her. He doesn't hear the voice again. Maybe it was never really there at all. But he can't shake the feeling that she's still there, somehow, somewhere. Like she's just out of sight, on some other plane of existence he can't see. Sitting there, in the grass where she disappeared, he can feel her so clearly in his mind. He has a sudden, vivid memory of their first date. She spilled her coffee all over him, and they had to go back to her place so she could lend him a clean pair of pants. She was terrified he would be angry, but they laughed about it for the rest of the day instead. He can smell that coffee, feel that laughter bubbling in his throat. It's more vivid than a simple memory. It's her, somehow. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he spots something strange. A fluorescent, glowing light, radiating blue and yellow, twisting and turning in his peripheral vision. He turns toward it and climbs to his feet. He reaches out toward the shape, unable to stop himself, and then he's gone. The police would never discover what happened to the couple. How could they? They were victims of a force that the authorities could never hope to understand. This young man and his girlfriend encountered an anomaly known as SCP-463. SCP-463 is a semi-corporeal ontokinetic tetrahedral construct. Try to say that 5 times fast. The physicality of the anomaly is of dubious and spurious nature. As a facet of its containment, the anomaly is semanto-conceptually bound to the statement contained within Unit 7783 of Site 196. SCP-463 cannot always be perceived, and its perceptibility varies depending on the nature of the person attempting to perceive it. When effectively perceived, the anomaly emits a fluorescent glow on the blue-yellow gradient and maintains a fixed position in space no matter what kinetic force is used against it. SCP-463 is extremely difficult to physically interact with, and can only be done using a complex series of actions known as semanto-conceptual interactivity. This is also the method through which SCP-463 was contained. There are unfortunate consequences to effectively interacting with SCP-7783 on a physical level. Doing so causes abstraction, biological, conceptual, and ontokinetic in affected subjects. This tends to result in said subject transforming into an intangible conceptual sapience. I'll elaborate a bit more on that side effect in a moment. Individuals subject to the influence of SCP-7783 who are affiliated with the Foundation are referred to as Personnel-Associated Sapient Concepts, or PASCs. These sapient concepts still retain their higher cognitive functions, though they lack the biological functions associated with their original physical human forms. They are still capable of interacting with reality via cognitive subversive impression, or the limited and brief interference in the psychological and neurological activity of sentient and sapient beings in their vicinity. PASC presence can be detected through this brief interference, as well as an increase in parietal-like tendencies in those nearby. For those unfamiliar with the term, parietal-like tendencies refer to the tendency to see patterns and meaning in random stimuli. For example, seeing a face in a piece of burnt toast, observing a surprised facial expression in the shape of a faucet, or eyes in a wallpaper pattern. SCP-7783 was first discovered by senior researchers Dr. River Corys and Caden Powell while the two were off-duty. Some of the details of this initial discovery have been redacted from the official file due to potential concerns of containment breach, but the general shape of events is easy enough to determine. The two were taking a walk in the park together when they stumbled upon the anomaly. Dr. Corys took matters into his own hands by accident, performing a semanto-conceptual interaction with SCP-7783 without realizing what he was doing. 2 additional personnel were brought in, and the anomaly was successfully bound and contained. However, in the process, Dr. Corys' exposure proved to be too much, and he began the process of PASC transition. Caden Powell specifically requested that all interviews conducted between him and Dr. River Corys during the latter's transformation to be redacted from the official file on SCP-7783. Without those, we only have the general report to go on, but it does still provide an important glimpse into the transformation process. An hour after exposure to SCP-7783's effects, River displayed intact conceptual coherency and acute emotional distress. He seemed to be aware of what was happening to him, as well as his helplessness to stop it. His relationship to his physical form was still intact at this point, but he could feel just how temporary that state now was. After one day, River's conceptual coherency had gone from intact to intermittent. His physical form was still intact most of the time, but it was growing more and more difficult for him to communicate linguistically with Dr. Powell. 1 week later, River's conceptual coherency was described as spurious. There was an increase in cognitive subversive influence, and his biological functions were beginning to shut down as the physical body began to become less and less tangible. After 1 month, River's biological and physical form became entirely abstract. Dr. Powell observed an increase in parietal-like influence, seeing the lost man's face in everything he looked at, even when it could not possibly be there. The leaves on a nearby tree, the bark on its trunk, the ripples in a puddle of water, it all looked just a bit like him. But then Powell would blink and the image would be lost. What would later be regarded as standard PASC influence began to manifest in the area, as exhibited by the parietal-like effects, as well as a general psychic impression. It was most prevalent in the immediate vicinity of the disassociated fruiting body. 1 year after River first stumbled upon SCP-7783, he was entirely converted into an abstract entity. His physical form was lost, and subversive cognitive influences were observable. Even outside of PASC proximity, parietal-like influence persisted for associated individuals. The most affected was Dr. Powell, who continued to see River's face everywhere he looked. It became so prevalent for him that he sought a psych evaluation, but it was confirmed that he was not suffering from any mental illness or grief-induced hallucinations. This increase in pattern seeking by the brain and recognition of facial imagery and random visual stimuli was due to River's lingering PASC influence. After Dr. River Corys was lost to SCP-7783, Caden Powell took on the role of Provisional Containment Director. His #1 priority was to determine methods that might allow for the reversal of SCP-7783's effects. As far as I can tell, no such methods have been uncovered yet. But Powell is persistent and has dedicated every ounce of his brainpower and every resource afforded by the SCP Foundation to uncovering a way to restore those lost to SCP-7783. During my research into SCP-7783, I was able to access an interview between Research Director Caden Powell and D-Class number 78990, conducted as part of a larger study on PASE cognitive subversive impressions. The purpose of this test was to induce an impression in order to open up a line of communication with PASE-01, formerly Dr. River Corey's. If PASE-01 could influence the mind of an individual, perhaps that individual could act as a conduit of sorts, through which Powell and River could speak directly. Research Director Powell began the conversation with a polite greeting and the confirmation of D-78990's date of birth and full legal name. D-78990 confirmed his identity and asked what exactly they were doing during this experiment. Powell responded, "Well, essentially, I'm here to just talk to you for a bit, take some notes on your behavior and the like an evaluation of sorts." D-78990 shifted awkwardly in his seat and asked what they should talk about. Powell shrugged. The response shocked D-78990. "Aren't you leading the way?" Powell shrugged again, idly clicking his pen. His brow furrowed, his thoughts seeming to be far away. "I guess we could start with something like, say, a favorite color." "Favorite colors?" The D-Class couldn't help but laugh at that. "Favorite colors? I thought it'd be something more, I don't know, science-y?" Powell sighed. "Well, I'm mostly just monitoring your behavior, looking for any signs indicative of..." D-78990 sat up a bit more stiffly in his chair, anxiety spiking. "Signs of what? I got cancer or something?" "No," Powell shook his head. "Just... never mind. Why bring up cancer out of all things?" Now it was D-78990's turn to shrug. "I don't know. My dad died of it, a long time ago." "What type?" "Lung cancer, stage 4. The conversation felt less like a typical Foundation research interview and more like the makings of an awkward first date. The back and forth, the get-to-know-you dance of questions and half-hearted answers. Powell offered a verbal olive branch, an attempt to sympathize. "I knew someone whose dad passed from lung cancer." "Yeah, well, we probably saw it coming. He was a pack-a-day smoker for..." Powell interrupted. 22 years. D-78990's eyes widened in surprise. "Oh, nice guess. Yeah, 22. You know, I would have loved to work here," D-78990 remarked. "Really?" Powell raised an eyebrow. "What makes you say that? From what I've seen, you don't have a research background." "I wanted to go into medicine when I was younger, you know." Powell nodded. "Would have been nice to work for a place like this, one with a real purpose, you know." Powell smiled weakly. "Yeah, it definitely beats working in IT for a bunch of geriatrics." D-78990 laughed at the remark, and Powell furrowed his brow, confused. River would have laughed at that joke. At the unexpected mention of his lost partner, Powell flinched. "Yeah?" D-78990 nodded. "He would have, yeah. Always hated working back in Loxy." Powell's eyes lit up with nostalgic recognition. "Yeah, I remember. I remember it too clearly." D-78990 laughed along with him, despite never having worked with Powell and Dr. Corey's in the past. "Oh, definitely. It was crazy times, crazy times. Used to get so mad at that place. Get run up for the stupidest stuff, you and... Man, me and him. We really did. Chris always had a stick up his butt, though. Made it hell. He was too old to be working, that's why. Always decomposed at the desk. What was that one joke you made about his nose to me?" D-78990 was now speaking about Dr. Corey's memories in the first person. "Which one?" Powell asked. "The night after D&B? Oh, the one about him looking 8 and 80 at the same time?" D-78990 cackled, throwing his head back. "Please. Oh, God. River was crying laughing to that. That night was the most he had laughed in a long time then." Powell cracked a smile. "Yeah, I remember that night. It was amazing, just making stupid jokes to each other, enjoying the time we had. Like all the time in the world was ours, huh? Made everything better. Life was perfect." Powell sighed. "The neighbors didn't hear perfect," D-78990 remarked. "But the neighbors always complained about how loud we were." Powell shook his head. "Well, I was loud. Noisy. That was something you liked about him." D-78990 switched back and forth between third and first person, sometimes speaking about River, and other times speaking as if River was talking through him. I still remember his laughing. I still remember it all. D78990 smiled wistfully. He just didn't know how to take it seriously. Powell laughed at that, a smile breaking free from his mask of composure. Ha! Well, yeah, that's how he was. Always loud and bursting with energy. Made every situation colorful. Wonder if this river guy's still like that, D78990 remarked. Oh, he's still out there somewhere. Powell wiped the tear from his eye. Still the life of someone's party. Who is? Powell's stomach dropped. That was it then. The impression was gone. He sighed, composing himself. He wouldn't show his grief to this stranger. He forced a terse, polite smile. Never mind. And that was the conclusion of the interview. D78990 and Dr. Powell had never spoken prior to the interview, nor had D78990 ever previously met Dr. River Corys. Still, with some anomalous intervention, the two had been able to share a few memories of the man, and for a moment, he was still as he was, tangible, human, alive. But the moment was fleeting, as are all impressions of those changed by SCP-463. As for containment procedures, the specific instructions for the semento-conceptual, or related to the inherent semantic information of a concept in reality, binding of SCP-463, may only be accessed by a select few specialists. Any personnel assigned to the area are strictly prohibited from any hypothetical, speculative, fantastical, or intimate thought related to SCP-463. I am only able to engage with the subject matter to this degree from a safe distance, and do not suggest you approach the area after learning this much about the anomaly. Due to its particular nature, amnestics are not sufficient to treat its impact on the human mind. Complete amnesticization of personnel regarding its existence, or lack of existence, would cause semento-conceptual unbinding. This would technically result in a containment breach. Such is the trouble with semi-corporeal constructs. Essentially, as long as it is known to be contained, the containment should hold. If you have a bit of a headache trying to wrap your mind around the whole situation, you are not alone. Though amnestics are not an acceptable solution to SCP-463 and its influence, selective thought-blocking medications derived from Class C amnestics can be used to induce a sort of deliberate brain fog, a barrier that prevents an individual from thinking about SCP-463 in any way that extends beyond particular containment-related tasks and day-to-day Foundation operations. Once upon a time, in the earliest days of my research, I may have said that I didn't believe in ghosts. As a man of science, I balked at the concept of that which I could not prove with empirical data. But now I have seen, encountered, and learned of too many inexplicable forces in this world to hold the same view. Perhaps the victims, and I do believe them to be victims, of SCP-463 are not ghosts in the traditional sense. They did not die, after all. Their bodies simply dissolved. Their consciousness remained in some form. But is that not what we think of when we think of a ghost? The lingering impression of someone who was once flesh and blood? Take away the body, and what remains, whether you call it a spirit or a personnel-associated sapient concept, seems to meet the criteria. Dr. River Corys is gone. At least, the part of him that could be seen, perceived, known, and loved. What remains is that brief impression, that glimpse of a memory, ever so brief, that laugh, once shared, never to be heard again. There may not be any rattling chains or creaks on the staircase, but SCP-463 has created its fair share of what I feel compelled to call ghosts. Agree or disagree with my verbiage, I don't mind. Those left behind are still just as haunted.
A man is lying in a hospital bed, and it is clear that he is not doing well. A group of doctors buzz around him performing various tests, checking his vital signs again and again. The man feels weak and a little disoriented, and the looks on the various doctors' faces tells him all he needs to know. Something is very wrong with him. Finally, there is a break in the commotion, and the doctors stop prodding at him and peering into his eyes with a bright, blinding light. All of the doctors and nurses leave the room except for one. The doctor steps towards the man and tells him that he has some bad news. You see, before the doctor can finish, someone else emerges from the shadows in the corner of the room and taps him on the shoulder. I'll handle this. The man hadn't noticed this person, but he can see now that he's dressed in a suit, and unlike the doctors, he doesn't have any identifying items like a name tag or badge. Maybe he's some kind of professor, or a renowned surgeon who is going to tell him how they will make him better. The doctor steps back from the bed, but the man in the suit tells the doctor that it would be best if he and the patient could be left alone. Just for a moment, of course. The doctor nods in agreement and leaves the room. The man in the suit waits until the door is closed behind him to continue. He tells the sick man that he has a rare condition, quite rare. So rare, in fact, that you're the only person to ever have it, the only recorded case in history. The man in the suit sits down on the bed next to the man and takes his hand, lifting it up, examining it. The man's hand is an odd color. It has a slight green tint to it, and the skin itself appears to be taking on a fibrous quality. The sick man feels very tired, but he manages to whisper, "Are you a doctor? Are you going to help me?" The man in the suit responds, "Yes, I'm a doctor. Of sorts. A doctor and a researcher. I work for a very important organization, and I specialize in cases just like yours. Well, not exactly like yours. You're unique. Quite special, in fact." The sick man offers a weak smile. "I'm very lucky." "Oh yes, very lucky indeed. Well, not because of your condition, of course, but because I am here. You see, if it's all right with you, we'd like for you to come with us, to come stay at one of our facilities for a while. We can't promise that we'll be able to figure out exactly what's happening or why. But if we can, we have a much better chance of figuring out how to cure it. To cure you, so you can go back to a normal life." "Do I have much of a choice?" the sick man asks. "Of course you do. It's completely up to you. I think this would be your best course of action, your best by far, in fact, but we can't force you to do anything you don't want to do." The sick man looks down at his greenish hand again, turning it over in front of his face, examining the small growths that seem to be sprouting from his skin. "When do we leave?" "Right now," the man in the suit tells him. "The nurses will come get you ready, and then we'll be on our way." The man in the suit leaves the room and closes the door behind him. Standing next to the door in the hallway are a pair of men wearing tactical uniforms like a SWAT team. The man in the suit tells them that luckily they won't be needed today. This one is coming easy. The sick man lies on a bed, but now he is in a new room. This one is even more sterile than the hospital, with cold concrete walls and harsh fluorescent lights. Just like in the hospital, he's surrounded by a seemingly never-ending cast of doctors, nurses, and researchers. They too poke and prod at him, take samples, and administer all kinds of tests. As time goes on, the man's condition only grows worse. It seems there's nothing that they can do to stop his condition from advancing. The green color spreads across his body, and his skin soon becomes woody and stiff. If he sits in one place for too long without moving, tiny fibers emerge from his skin, like probing roots looking for soil. All the while, the man grows weaker and more fragile. Even the slightest movement seems to cause him great pain. The doctor who originally brought the man to the facility gathers with a small group in the observation room next to the man's containment cell. They discuss the results of a recent test, which showed that much of the melanin in his skin has somehow been replaced with chlorophyll, and that the fibrous quality of his skin is being caused by the appearance of cellulose around his cells. In other words, he isn't just starting to look like a plant. He's truly becoming a plant, and there doesn't seem to be anything they can do to stop it. Try as they might, they haven't found a single clue as to what is causing the man's condition, or how to treat it. The man, though, seems strangely at peace with his fate. He's told that they're going to allow him to live, whether that be as a man or as a plant in containment, for as long as he can stay alive, and that he will be well taken care of to make the whole process as comfortable for him as possible. Even though they failed to find a cure for his anomalous disease, they will do everything in their power to make sure he doesn't suffer. A tragic yet familiar tale for the SCP Foundation. A normal person is subjected to an abnormal situation that completely changes their life, and not for the better. At least in this situation, the Foundation appears to have shown a rare glimpse of their own humanity, opting to make this safe class anomaly's existence as painless as possible, rather than force it to endure a lifetime of painful tests and studies. Or at least that's what you've been led to believe. Unfortunately, everything you've just seen about SCP-1500 is a lie. Those with Level 3 clearance, though, can learn the truth, which is that SCP-1500 is actually an extremely dangerous anomaly, whose true identity must be hidden from even the majority of the Foundation, for reasons you'll soon learn. SCP-1500 is not a man suffering from a condition that causes him to slowly transform into a plant-like being, but is actually a greenish-gray, smooth-skinned humanoid with no facial features at all. Its limbs are long and multi-jointed, and its abdomen is highly distended. The skin is exceptionally durable and tough, and though SCP-1500 has no visible sense organs like ears or a nose, it still appears to possess senses that are roughly equivalent to an average human's. The entity is incapable of speech, owing to its lack of a mouth, and it has not shown a need to eat, breathe, or sleep at all. In addition to the strange appearance of SCP-1500, its primary anomalous effect is the impact it has on any human that comes within its line of sight, or rather what would be its line of sight if it had any eyes. Those that do find that they will soon begin experiencing headaches, nausea, and an overwhelming sense of dread. These symptoms will increase over the next several minutes, with the headaches becoming more and more debilitating, and the feelings of nausea and fear growing until eventually the subject passes out. They will remain unconscious for roughly 15 seconds, after which they will awaken and claim to have no memory of ever being exposed to SCP-1500. But something else strange also happens to the subject after waking. When asked to describe the creature known as SCP-1500, they will no longer remark on its faceless head or long twisted limbs. Instead, they will describe the creature as being an average-looking Caucasian male. Even stranger is that to them, it now has a name, Zachary Callahan. In further interviews with subjects exposed to SCP-1500, it became clear that many of their memories had been reshaped to now include the entity in its human-looking Zachary Callahan form. They would often describe him as a close friend from childhood or early adulthood, and one that played a significant role in their lives. They also claim that they are perfectly capable of communicating with Zachary Callahan, able to carry on conversations with him, while all the observing researchers will see is an apparently one-sided conversation between the subject and the featureless gray-skinned creature. While Foundation personnel have found that they are able to remove the false memories from the subject's minds through the use of amnestics, they have yet to be able to reverse the effect that causes the subject to see SCP-1500 as a human being, and everyone who has been exposed continues to see the entity as Zachary Callahan forevermore. It is still unknown what kind of long-term effects this exposure may have, or how dangerous to their mental or physical health it will turn out to be. Even more concerning is that evidence has emerged that SCP-1500 may be able to affect more than just those in its immediate presence. Recently, a United States senator was giving a televised speech on a rather uninteresting topic. The speech started out normal enough, but then the senator began to relay an anecdote about a childhood fishing trip he had taken with a friend. You won't be surprised to learn that according to the senator, the friend's name was none other than Zachary Callahan. Investigations into the senator's background concluded that there was no person by that name of the appropriate age in the area where he grew up. It was also discovered the senator had suffered an especially bad migraine at a dinner party the week before the speech. Further research into SCP-1500's memory-altering effects have also revealed that they might just be more intrusive than first believed. Rather than simply appearing as an old friend, subjects exposed to 1500 have begun to report that Zachary Callahan actually played a much more prominent role in their lives, either as a close relative, a parental figure, or even a former lover. In each of these cases, the subjects described their feelings for Zachary Callahan as ones of adoration, and that he made them feel protected and loved. Most troubling of all is a recent addendum to the SCP-1500 file, which describes the very latest research on the anomaly and its effects. It is now estimated that as many as 23,000 people all across the world have been affected by the creature, with the idea of Zachary Callahan implanted into their memories. It is unknown why it is trying to spread its influence so far and wide, but one clue that may point to a nefarious purpose is that it seems to be disproportionately targeting political and military figures, as well as SCP Foundation personnel. Following these new developments, classification of SCP-1500 to Keter was requested and granted. Due to the risk that SCP-1500 poses through its anomalous effects, and its powerful ability to influence those in positions of great power, it is permanently kept in a modified humanoid containment cell at Site-17. No personnel are allowed to enter into its containment chamber under any circumstances, nor are there security cameras in its cell. A false containment document describing a human male with an anomalous plant-like effect was placed in the database in order to deter further investigation into the real SCP-1500. And any personnel who experience painful, persistent headaches are immediately transferred away from Site-17, while any who attempt to breach containment are immediately terminated. Is SCP-1500 planting the seeds for something big by infiltrating the minds of some of the most influential people on Earth? Or is it merely looking for a connection, as it takes on a form that it wishes it could have, in the only way it can, inside an imagination? Perhaps one day, we will know the answer.
You open your eyes, only to find something blocking your vision. Are those teeth? Human teeth? Growing out of your eyes? Oh no. Oh God, no. Taking the subway can be a real hit or miss experience. On one hand, it's cheaper than driving, especially with gas prices these days. It's convenient, eco-friendly, and removes any potential stress about where to park. But it can also be hot, poorly maintained, and worst of all, it's filled with the public. These are the thoughts running through the woman's head as she stands on the subway on the way home from work. She holds onto a nearby pole for balance, struggling to maintain a bubble of personal space as a steady stream of new passengers climb on at each stop. She can feel her chest tightening with anxiety, and she takes a deep breath to loosen the stress. Just a couple more stops to go, and then she can get out of here and retreat to the comfort of her apartment. The train car slows down, and the doors open for the penultimate stop. Great! After this one, she'll be home free. Of course, more people climb on. Everybody has places to go, she reminds herself. It's fine. But as one pale, jumpy-looking man crowds a little bit too close to the pole she's holding, she feels her anxiety levels spike again. Why won't he just respect her personal space? Come on, buddy. It's a crowded train, but there's enough room to take a step back. She's working up the nerve to say something when the train jerks suddenly, starting back up. The sharp motion sends the man rocking forward, and he bumps into her, hard. She feels a sudden sharp pain in her hand and looks down to see a speck of blood. Seriously? She swears at the strange man, unable to help herself. He glances down, and his eyes widen. He apologizes profusely and backs away from her, unmistakable terror in his eyes. A bit of an overreaction, she thinks. She just yelled a bit. It isn't as if she was going to hurt him. But he pushes through the crowd, moving away from her, and she doesn't care to follow. The train slows, and the doors slide open again. Thank goodness, her stop. She shoves her way out of the train car as fast as she can and doesn't slow down until she's unlocking the door to her apartment. Time to tend to the weirdest injury she's ever gotten. She disinfects the wound on her hand and begins to apply a bandage. Now that she's slowed down, she can get a better look at it. She had assumed the guy's keys had poked her or something, but now, examining it more carefully, it looks kind of like a bite? Did he have some kind of animal up his sleeve or something? It all happened so fast, she couldn't really tell. Better to be safe than sorry. She'll go get a rabies vaccine tomorrow. With that plan in place and a bandage applied to her hand, she quickly forgets about the hellish subway ride, the nervous man, and the strange bite. The next day, she gets her rabies shot and puts the whole bizarre encounter out of her mind for good. And it stays there, out of sight and out of mind. Until about a week later, when her gums begin to ache. It starts with a twinge, a bit of discomfort one morning that wakes her up before her alarm. But as the day goes on, the ache grows more and more difficult to ignore. She finds herself chewing on her pen during meetings, alleviating the itching, painful feeling in her gums with the pressure of it. A few days later, it's all she can think about. She half considers picking up one of those hard plastic rings for teething babies. At that point, she realizes it's time to go to the dentist. They'll know what to do. But when the dentist leans her back in that adjustable chair and peers into her mouth, he is just as clueless as she is, perhaps even more so. She's presenting symptoms of a condition known as hyperdontia, he explains. She is, at the age of 30 years old, growing new teeth. Not wisdom teeth that are coming in, but a whole new row of teeth just behind the ones she already has. He advises her to come back in once the teeth have grown in all the way, and they can discuss next steps then. She calls in sick to work the next day. She lies and tells them it's the flu. How could she explain the truth? But at least there's a solution in sight. The dentist will help her figure out what to do next. And surely this will be the worst of it, right? Unfortunately, she couldn't be more wrong. When she wakes up the next day, she notices some difficulty breathing through her nose, accompanied by a feeling of discomfort in her nostrils. Oh great, is she actually sick now? She goes to blow her nose, but nothing comes out. She rubs at her nostrils and is startled by a sudden sharp pain and the sensation of something solid in there. What the hell is going on? She rushes to the bathroom mirror, tilting her head back to get a better look. When she can make out what is blocking her nostrils, her jaw drops. Teeth. They're smaller than the ones in her mouth and somewhat obscured, but There's no doubt about it. Little rows of teeth have erupted inside of her nose. She calls her dentist and schedules an immediate appointment. She struggles to explain on the phone, but no matter what words she chooses, she knows the doctor won't truly understand until he sees her condition with his own eyes. And when he does see it, he can't stop himself from crying out in shock. This is no ordinary case of hyperdontia. This is something else entirely, something that should be medically impossible. Seeing the appearance of teeth inside of the woman's nose, the dentist decides to perform a thorough examination of the rest of her face and head. Much to his and her horror, he finds small teeth beginning to erupt in her ear canals too. He warns that if they are not removed, they could cause permanent damage to her hearing. There's no doubt about it. For the sake of her well-being, the dentist must perform the strangest extractions of his career. The woman is given an anesthetic, and he gets to work. By the time he is finished, the dentist has pulled 36 teeth of varying sizes and shapes from her mouth, nose, and ears. It was a harrowing affair, but at least it's over. He prescribes pain medication, an antibiotic, and some time off of work, and advises the woman to give him a call if she experiences anything like this again. Neither of them will say it aloud, but they're both privately terrified that she'll have to come back in and do it all over again. For the next few weeks, the woman feels like she's back to normal. She's a bit shaken up by the experience, a bit exhausted, but otherwise it all seems to be resolved. Then the aches start up again, not just in her gums this time, but in her ears, in her nose, and more terrifying of all, in new places too. She can feel them, the germs of new teeth growing under the surface in between her fingers and her toes, even in her eyelids. The feeling was unpleasant and distracting before, but now it is absolute agony. She can barely dial the telephone to contact her dentist, but she manages to call him and drag herself down to the office. At first, he doesn't want to believe it, but then he performs an X-ray. The images that come back turn his stomach, and he nearly vomits onto the floor. He can see them clear as day. Teeth, 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 growing everywhere. The woman feels that unique ache, the building pressure of something struggling to grow, ready to burst through the skin and be born. More teeth in her mouth and teeth in her eyes, her ears, all over her body. Even if he extracts every tooth again, even if he plucks out each new growth, there will be more waiting to replace them. Unsure of what else to recommend, he advises the woman to check herself into the hospital. Whatever her affliction is, it has progressed beyond his capabilities. Weeks later, the woman is lying in her hospital bed, weak, exhausted, barely able to move. Her skin is dotted with teeth. Her doctors tried to perform surgery to remove some of the teeth before they could erupt, but the incisions became tiny mouths filled with even more teeth. Now, they've all but given up. She can barely open her eyes to get a look at the strange figures that enter her hospital room, promising to help get to the bottom of her condition. They're scientists, they say, and they specialize in unusual conditions like hers. This poor, unfortunate woman is considered the first recorded patient to be infected with SCP-463. SCP-463 is an infectious disease, the most notable symptom of which is the manifestation of severe hyperdontia in unusual parts of the body. The initial source of the infection has been traced to the location now known as Building 2450, a former men's bathroom in a company service station off of a major motorway in the United Kingdom. It is unknown exactly how the infection is transmitted, but Level 5 HAZ suits have been ineffective at containing and preventing the infection. The disease can affect a wide variety of mammalian species, including but not limited to rodents, dogs, and humans. Approximately 23% of mammals exposed to the initial infection source area will contract SCP-463. Infection can also be passed through a bite, provided the bite is deep enough to draw blood. Infections from bites occur at a rate of approximately 12%. The initial stage of infection is characterized by the presentation of hyperdontia in various orifices of the body. I am sorry to say that is exactly what it sounds like, the eruption of extra teeth in places where no teeth should be. This generally begins in the mouth, as extra teeth sprout from the gums, the roof of the mouth, and the frenulum beneath the tongue. However, as the disease progresses, any bodily opening can become fair game, including the nostrils, the eye sockets, and other, even less comfortable locations. The size of the teeth varies depending on the size of the opening and tends to be proportional to the space available. Teeth produced as a result of SCP-2450 infection grow at a rate approximately 12 times that of ordinary teeth and can grow from gem to full root completion over the course of a period between 3 weeks and 9 months, depending on size. As the infection progresses, more and more rows of teeth will grow further and further back into the affected orifice. Once all natural bodily orifices have grown at least one full row of teeth, the infection will progress into its next stage. At this stage, parts of the body that form a semi-closed space, such as the spaces between the toes or the armpits, will begin to erupt teeth. If that wasn't horrible enough, any apertures formed on the body via external trauma, such as cuts on the skin, will become growth sites for SCP-2450 teeth. Did you just feel a shiver run down your spine? Me too. My own spine, not your spine, you understand. Back to the matter at hand, which I'm so sorry to tell you does in fact get worse. You see, as the infection progresses and more teeth are growing, the calcium and other minerals required to grow these teeth have to come from somewhere. These minerals will be leached from the body's natural stores, and the process can frequently result in osteoporosis and hypocalcemia. Administering calcium and other mineral supplements to SCP-2450 patients will keep them alive, and they will continue to produce teeth indefinitely if this is the case. You might be wondering if the process of growing all of these teeth is especially painful. Allow me to provide absolutely no reassurance. It is. It has been described as extremely painful and similar to the teething pains experienced by young children as their regular teeth develop and grow in. Much like teething infants, patients will experience a strong desire to address this pain by biting or grinding the affected teeth. However, as the infection progresses, the teeth will begin to erupt in areas that are incapable of biting. In these cases, patients will often grind the teeth against solid objects such as the corners of walls. This activity has been highly discouraged, as it could result in cuts and lacerations that may provide a breeding ground for even more teeth, resulting in a truly vicious cycle. Incidentally, this behavior led to the first recorded instance of SCP-2450 infection via tooth-to-blood contact. SCP-2450 was first discovered by the Foundation during a routine search of medical literature, and on February 19, 2009, the Foundation classified it as an anomalous phenomenon sufficiently distinct from hyperdontia. At that point, standard information suppression policy was applied successfully, and the pattern of outbreaks was then used to trace the source to the aforementioned service station. At that point, a series of quarantines and experimentation revealed that the men's restroom in Wing B was the specific point of origin. As far as the Foundation has been able to determine, there is nothing anomalous about the service station or that particular bathroom, aside from the SCP-2450 infections themselves. The station was first built in 1983 and operated normally for decades. So when and how did everything change? By interviewing cleaning and security staff and reviewing years of security footage, the SCP Foundation was able to tentatively pinpoint the date of origin for SCP-2450 to July 15, 2008. On that day, the following events were captured by security cameras located in the building. First, 3 men in black hooded sweatshirts entered the building, their hoods pulled up to obscure their faces. One of the men carried a large, seemingly empty backpack. Another held an unidentified green implement. The third man had nothing in his hands. Shortly after entering the building, the men stopped outside of the Wing B men's bathroom and spoke amongst themselves. No audio was recorded, and their lips could not be seen, so there is no way of knowing exactly what was said. But whatever it was, the men entered the bathroom a few moments later. Before shutting the door behind them, the last man examined the area, looking to see if they were being followed. Seeing that they were alone, he closed the door, and the 3 of them disappeared. They were inside the bathroom for the next 2.5 hours. Whatever happened in that bathroom is still unknown, as security cameras inside of restrooms are generally frowned upon and tend not to be installed. After those 2.5 hours were up, 2 out of the 3 men exited the bathroom, the man with the backpack and the man who was carrying the green object. The third man was not with them. The backpack now appeared to be full, and a great deal heavier than it was on the way in. The 2 men walked to the main entrance of the building, at which point the one without the backpack stopped and reached into the top pocket of his hooded sweatshirt. He then patted the pockets of his trousers. Whatever he was looking for was not there. He turned to head back into the building, but the other man placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. The two argued for a moment before leaving the building and getting into a car. Later analysis of the license plate revealed it to be a stolen vehicle. They drove off toward the south and out of sight. Subsequent attempts to track the men down have so far been unsuccessful. The cleaner on duty that day later reported that one of the bathroom stalls was locked for an unusually long time. When he came back and was able to enter and clean the stall, he spotted a large amount of what appeared to be white gravel on the floor and the lid of the toilet. This is now believed to be dental matter. Speaking of unidentified objects, the green implement from the security tapes was later discovered and identified. It is now referred to as SCP-463-1 and is stored in Reliquary 87B-6, Locker 12004. SCP-463-1 is a green plastic toothbrush of unknown make or manufacturer. As you might have guessed, it is no ordinary toothbrush. When a tooth is brushed with SCP-463-1, the teeth will be worn down to the root at a rapid pace. An entire molar, including the root, can be removed with the brush in 5 minutes. In spite of this, it appears to do no damage to any other surrounding tissue such as the skin or gums. On the back of the handle, the text, "For non-oral use only," is printed. The origins of this toothbrush and the motivations for the men that entered the bathroom stall that day are still unknown. However, given the information that we do have, I feel I can make an educated guess. It is my personal theory that the third man, the one who had never been found, was suffering from an advanced form of the SCP-463 infection. When the men attempted to treat his condition with the anomalous toothbrush, he had advanced to such a severe state that his body was primarily made up of teeth, and he crumbled apart during the process. His remains were then stuffed into the backpack and taken out of the building. The debris left behind somehow infected the area, leading to the subsequent SCP-463 infections that have occurred in the area since. I have no way to officially confirm this speculation, of course, but it seems as reasonable of a theory as something can be where anomalous tooth-based diseases and unusually powerful toothbrushes are concerned. Any patients afflicted with SCP-463 must be kept in Secure War Land 12 and physically restrained in order to contain the infection and prevent any further spread. The initial source of infection is contained at the site of its discovery in Building 2450, which has been disguised as an electrical substation. Building 2450 is kept securely locked and surrounded by a standard substation fence, which has been covered with danger of death warning signs in order to deter any civilians from approaching. The building is kept under constant surveillance, and anyone attempting to enter the premises must be detained and thoroughly questioned. The only method of entering Building 2450 is a double-door system, including an isolation chamber which prevents any small mammals from entering the building. No mammals, with the exception of approved test subjects, may exit the building. One member of Foundation personnel with formal dentistry training must be assigned to monitor all dentistry journals and affiliated news sources for cases that might indicate an outbreak of SCP-463. If one is detected, swift and decisive action must be taken. There is currently no known cure for SCP-463. Patients who have been infected with the disease can either be kept alive with mineral supplements and produce teeth indefinitely, or they can slowly lose calcium and vital minerals over time until their body can no longer function. Either way, they will be a prisoner of the teeth until the day that they die, confined to a terrifying, toothy existence. Though those who have already been infected are somewhat doomed, at least until a cure can be found, we can take some comfort in the knowledge that SCP-463 can be easily avoided. Just stay away from the men's restroom in Building 2450 and try not to let anyone bite you, at least not hard enough to draw blood. Still, the images I saw while looking into SCP-463 will haunt me for quite some time. In fact, I think I've had my fill of the topic. My gums are beginning to itch, so if you'll excuse me, I think I'll go eat some caramels and forget to floss. Can't let the teeth get too comfortable.
Kids get bored. It's just part of growing up. Or at least, that's what their parents would always say. Living in a small town in England, you run out of things to do by your 5th birthday. By your 10th, you want nothing more than to move out. By your 15th, half the kids end up in hospital doing something stupid.
The kid entering the churchyard tonight is no exception. As he ducks under the gap in the chain-link fence, he catches the corner of his cast on the metal. The cast is already so covered in nicks and scratches that the new tear barely makes a difference. He has been trying to cut the cast off with kitchen scissors for the last 3 weeks. He'd broken his wrist riding his bike off the roof of his house. It would have worked if it wasn't for the postbox being a little too close to the building. His brother calls out to him from up ahead. He's already at the door to the church. The kid hears his best friend shuffling around nervously behind him. He waits for her turn to duck under the fence and follow him into the churchyard, away from the road. Even in the middle of nowhere, in total darkness, the kid can tell she's scared to break the rules. The pair of them rush over to meet the kid's brother at the entrance to the church. The older brother grins at both of them. At 21 years old, he may as well be 41. Towering over the two of them, with a few scraggly chin hairs and a tattoo on his neck. They can't imagine what his life must be like. Going to university in London, driving a car, getting tattoos, drinking alcohol that costs more than 10 quid and doesn't come from the corner store. What a life. There isn't a door to kick open. The church building is in total disrepair. Only the limestone structure is left standing. The windows have all been smashed in long ago, and the pews rotted away, leaving only some moss creeping its tendrils into every nook and cranny. As the three of them make their way inside, they look up to see the starry night sky above their heads, no roof left intact. In fact, the only part of the building that seems to still be half standing is the tower at the far end. Even in the dark, they can still make out a tight spiral staircase hewn into the stone, disappearing up into the collapsing tower. The kid grins. What to explore first? They all split up, wandering around different parts of the church hall. The kid makes a beeline for a toppled-in patch of wall. He clambers up onto a window ledge and hoists himself up onto the wall, looking down at the other two. A stone gives way under his foot and almost sends him tumbling, but he throws out his broken wrist just in time to balance himself. Across the hall, his best friend is checking her flip phone anxiously. She'd said earlier in the evening that she needed to be back before 1 a.m. or her parents would be worried. It's already 12:45. The kid's older brother calls out across the church. "I need the toilet. I'm gonna climb straight to the top of the tower and do it off the edge. Watch out for rain." And with that, he disappears through the little doorway and up the spiral staircases. Very quickly, the sound of his footsteps disappears, leaving the kid and his friend alone together. The kid looks over his shoulder out of the church building. From up on this patch of wall, he is almost at the perfect height to pick an apple from the tree next to them, if he can just stretch out far enough. There, he plucks 2 apples, one for him and one for his friend. He tosses it to her, but she misses the catch. Looking up at him, he can tell she already wants to go home. He grumbles and jumps down from the wall. The landing jars his leg pretty badly, but he clenches his teeth hard enough that no noise escapes his mouth. He grins at his best friend. She doesn't return it. It's late. She needs to get home soon, and the only way they can get home is in his big brother's car. "Fine, I guess it's probably home time." She gives him her best attempt at a smile. The kid walks over to the stairs, sticks his head through the doorway, and calls out. No response. Great. How high do these stairs go? They can't be more than a couple of stories, surely. He calls again. Still nothing. His best friend appears at his shoulder. They both peer up the staircase. It's such a tight spiral that they can't really see anything beyond the first 10 steps. It's dark in there, almost too dark to see where they're going. He gets out his flashlight and flicks it on. That should be enough light for the both of them. The kid plants his foot on the first step and starts climbing. The steps feel well worn. They're smooth in the middle and dip down slightly from years of use. 1 step, 2 steps, 3, 4, 5. His flashlight dies. He shakes it, knocking the back of it a couple of times like they do in the movies. Nothing, not even a flicker. He asks his friend if she has a flashlight. She doesn't. So the two of them climb in the dark. Very quickly, the stairs change shape. Or maybe that's the wrong word. They aren't changing shape, they're just shrinking. It's subtle, but definitely happening. The gaps between them are getting smaller, and the undersides of the stairs above are bearing down on the kid's head slightly. The kid stops and turns to his best friend. He can hardly see her at all in the dark. She's just a slightly darker shadow standing a couple of steps down from him. He asks if the steps are getting smaller. She tells him not that she can tell. He insists they must be. The stairs above their heads are getting lower and lower. The space is closing in on them slightly. She says she has no idea what he's talking about. Tutting at her, he takes a couple more steps up the staircase. The cast on his arm tightens. That's strange.
He keeps going, and all of a sudden, it feels like a vice. The blood flow is cut off almost instantaneously. His fingers feel cold and start to tingle, his forearm swelling and bulging around the edge of the cast. The pressure building up inside it is ridiculous, feels almost as if the cast splits apart and falls off. Blood rushes back to his fingertips. He flexes them gratefully, turning to his best friend. Even in the darkness, he can tell she's peering at him intently. He runs a hand over his arm, massaging it gently. That's strange. His arm feels different from how it did before it went into the cast. There's more hair on it now, and the muscle running along his forearm feels more pronounced. He flexes his wrist. No pain, no stiffness, nothing. He isn't due to get his cast off for another month at least. Those doctors clearly don't know what they're talking about. Are you standing on your tiptoes? His friend asks from behind him. He looks down at her shadow, confused, and tells her no, he isn't. The kid apparently looks taller. Must just be uneven stairs or a trick of the light. Come to think of it, though, his best friend does look a little different standing there below him, even just from her silhouette. She isn't any taller, but her figure looks different. Her voice sounds a little lower. His brother, that's who they're after. They'd get to the top of the stairs, find him, and see what was going on. Must just be some strange optical illusions happening here in the dark. The two of them press on, continuing up the stairs. Step after step they go. They must be up on the second floor by now, surely. But there's no light ahead of them indicating any kind of exit, just more stairs. The kid asks his friend what time it is. He hears her flipping open her phone and pressing a couple of buttons, but no light fills the space. She presses them again and again. Nothing. Her battery must have died. That's the only explanation. She tries to tell him that it was almost on full a minute ago, but he doesn't really listen, because at that moment, he sticks a hand in his pocket to take out the apple he'd plucked. Warm goop sticks to his fingers. His back pocket is full of sticky mush. Little creatures wriggle around inside it. Maggots. How had he plucked a rotten apple? It felt fine on the branch. He takes another step, hands still absently hovering over his pocket. A buzzing sound. A couple of flies brush past his fingers. What had they been doing in his pocket? He hears them drift around him and up the staircase until suddenly, their buzzing stops. He crouches down and squints hard in the dark. He can just about make out two little flies lying on the stair just 2 steps away from him, both on their backs, legs curled. The kid reaches back into his pocket and feels around. The sticky mush is gone. Just some kind of dry, dusty substance is left. Strangely, the kid doesn't panic. He knows somewhere in his head that everything happening to him is very peculiar, yet he doesn't feel worried about it at all. To be honest, all he really cares about right now is making it to the top of this staircase. He takes off, running 2 steps at a time up towards where his brother must be waiting. Part of his mind notices that the jarring feeling in his leg from jumping off the wall is gone. No time to think about that now. Up he runs, each stride throwing him further and further. Somewhere behind him, he can hear his best friend muttering something to herself, something incoherent and garbled. Her voice definitely sounds different now. It barely sounds like her anymore. She sounds more like her mother. The kid catches his foot on a step and falls. His best friend clatters into the back of him before she has a chance to stop. The two of them topple over, landing awkwardly on a step, enough to knock the wind out of him. She lies on top of him. Only, it can't be her. It feels like a fully grown woman, not his 15-year-old friend. She whispers to him. Her voice doesn't sound scared at all, though. If anything, she seems a little disinterested. What's happening to us? The kid breathes heavily, struggling to get the air back into his lungs. That's when he notices the smell. Something deathly rotten is filling the staircase. Something moldy and decaying. She seems to notice it too. The pair of them stand up straight and peer up the stairs. In the gloom, they can see it clearly enough. A person slumped on the ground. The smell tells them all they need to know about this person. They should run, right now. They should run back down the staircase and out of there. Yet both of them inexplicably and in unison continue walking up the stairs, closing the gap on the corpse. It blocks off 2 whole steps, lying awkwardly on its side, slightly hunched over as if the person had collapsed in a coughing fit. The kid almost slips over. Something small is under his foot, something metallic. He reaches down and picks it up, feeling its shape and knowing almost immediately what it is. He lifts the lid and flicks the red and gold lighter on. A little flame fills the staircase with light, orange and weak, dancing around the stone. It is just enough to make out the flecks of blood coughed out of the corpse's mouth and onto the stone steps. It is just enough to see the scruffy little beard sprouting out of the corpse's face. It's just enough to make out the tattoo on the corpse's neck.
The kid looks down at his older brother. Not just his older brother, but his older brother. Whereas before he had seemed like he was 41, he now looks like it. 41 and dead from something in his lungs. The kid turns to see his best friend. A woman in her mid-30s looks back at him. Her hair even has a couple of telltale grays. She should look afraid, but her expression is almost blank. But there's a little something there, just enough of an expression to tell him that she's seeing the same transformation on his face looking back at her. The kid reaches up to touch his cheek. A wiry beard meets his fingertips. They should run. They should run back down these stairs and get out of here, call an ambulance and go home. And yet, the kid flicks the lighter closed, turns around, and steps over his older brother's body. As he walks up the stairs in silence, he hears his best friend doing the same. After 5 more stairs, his knee starts to give out. Then his hip soon after that. It gets harder and harder to stand up straight, so he lets himself stoop slightly. His best friend's breathing grows softer and wispier behind him. Their pace slows down. Each step seems to take more out of him, feeling harder than the last. He needs a rest. That's all he needs. If he can just sit down for a second. His chest clamps in on itself like a vice. Blood hammers in his ears. Sweat floods across his brow in an instant, and the whole world seems to tilt around him. The kid collapses on the ground, feeling his brittle wrist snapping under him. Pain shoots through his body as his chest squeezes tighter and tighter. He rolls onto his back, gasping for air with frail lungs. The kid claws at his sunken ribcage, feeling loose, wrinkled skin under his fingertips. With a monumental effort, he flicks the lighter on to see an old woman peering at him through the dark. He can hardly recognize his best friend anymore as she gently takes the lighter from his hand and steps over his convulsing body. He watches helplessly as she continues gingerly up the stairs in silence. She doesn't look back over her shoulder, disappearing around the corner, taking the light with her. Leaving the kid to die an old man in total darkness. With one final gasp of air before his heart gives out on him, he clings desperately to one hope. She's going to make it to the top of the stairs. She has to. It is fortunate in many ways that SCP-463 is in such a remote area. While the church has stood on that site for hundreds of years, for much of that time, it has been abandoned. Little is known about the history of the church, as many of the events around it have descended into local folklore. What is known about SCP-463 is that it is a spiral staircase housed within an abandoned church building in an undisclosed location in rural England. For all intents and purposes, it is an unremarkable set of stairs. Made from ordinary limestone from the local quarry, the steps are approximately 0.75 meters wide and worn away in the middle, apparently from frequent use. If you were to look at the outside of the church, you would see that the tower containing the staircase is not particularly tall and is in a state of disrepair. Taking a look inside that tower, however, seems to show the staircase extending up beyond the height of the tower, something that seems on the surface to be physically impossible. In fact, how high the staircase itself goes is a mystery to this day, as those studying SCP-463 are yet to find a way to see inside it beyond the first 2 floors. This is because every object, living or otherwise, that ascends up SCP-463 undergoes a rapid aging process. Organic creatures quickly grow older, die, and decompose on their way up the steps. Other objects behave as if a great deal of time has passed. Batteries and electronic devices go flat almost immediately. Decay is accelerated too, meaning wear and tear take place at an alarmingly fast rate. This renders any conventional methods of exploring SCP-463 obsolete. Sound and video recording equipment running on battery power quickly fail. After many attempts with different technology, recording devices linked to a robust cable were created specifically for trying to record footage beyond the first story of SCP-463. However, the video recordings failed around the 2nd story, and sound recordings failed around the 4th. Living subjects were required to transport these devices up the staircase, and so D-Class personnel were tasked with the job. Across all documented experiments, none of the subjects returned. In each case, a subtle change was noticed in the subjects upon crossing the 5th step. One subject paused, another gasped slightly, but beyond that, there was no physical or emotional discomfort for much of their ascent. Most were perfectly content to climb the stairs once they'd passed that 5th step. In fact, as the D-Class personnel climbed up the stairs and underwent the accelerated aging process, none of them appeared to be outwardly distressed for the most part. They all remained remarkably calm and almost disinterested in the way their bodies transformed before their very eyes. Video footage showed the subject's skin rapidly aging, undergoing conventional wrinkling and deterioration. Diseases appeared to develop at an advanced rate too, as one subject's body, recovered by pulling them back down with the rope they were attached to, contained tumors around the prostate and above the eye that were not present prior to the experiment. This subject was later discovered to have a family history of cancer. For all intents and purposes, it appears as if SCP-723 simply accelerates the natural aging process of the subject's body, following the same DNA instructions and deterioration that you would otherwise observe over the course of decades. D723-7 was the subject to make it furthest up the staircase before the connection was lost. Approaching the 4th floor, the signal grew very weak, but in the noise could be heard a handful of distressed murmurings, including possible references to a door or the door, and to dark and mark. Beyond this point, there is no usable evidence. Local folklore in the area indicates that SCP-723 has been producing the same effect for generations. Stories can be heard from local residents about old church congregations who used to meet in the building and would mysteriously lose grandparents, children, priests, and strays who would disappear up the staircase. It is theorized that this is why the church building was left abandoned for so long. SCP-723 was only identified relatively recently, in the early 2000s, after reports surfaced of local children going missing in its vicinity. In response, the area has been cordoned off and designated as Site 288. A 3-mile chain-link fence was erected around the churchyard with signage warning any visitors to steer well clear. A further 2-mile restriction zone with magnetic locks is scheduled to be constructed in the near future. 3 guards are stationed around SCP-723 at all times of the day. None of them openly carry any weapons, so as not to arouse much attention from any passersby, presenting the site as a mostly uninteresting, unsafe, derelict building. The guards are not permitted to approach or ascend the staircase, and the same goes for any SCP personnel. The only people permitted to enter SCP-723 are D-Class personnel, specifically approved by Foundation personnel with Level 4 clearance or higher. While little is known about the cause of the effect or how SCP-723 physically works, one thing is certain: no person who has started to walk up those stairs has ever come back down again. Now go and watch another entry from the classified files of DrBob, such as SCP-962, Tower of Babel, for another twisting structure of anomalous madness. And make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single anomaly as we delve further and further into the SCP Foundation's classified archives.